Harry, I told myself day after day. One of those nightmares that seem so real. They stay with you for a long while, brought on by a traumatic experience. That's all that it was. And alongside a few stiff drinks when my own words occasionally failed to convince me, I slowly began to forget. I slowly began to let it go and return to life as normal. Until yesterday, that is. You see, I'm someone who is very much into exercising. When I quit smoking 3.5 years ago, I decided to pour all my newly freed time and energy into getting fit. Not at first, though. It was only after I noticed that I was rapidly beginning to gain weight. I stepped onto the scale one morning to find to my shock that for the first time in my life, I had gone over 200 pounds. And that decided it for me. I set about picking up a cheap pair of running shoes from Walmart, grabbing an old pair of track pants from my closet, and began walking every day that I could. At the time, I wasn't in the best financial situation, so instead of getting a gym membership, I chose to use the neighborhood that I live in for my workout. For roughly an hour or so every day, I would wind my way through the residential streets before returning home with a sheen of sweat covering my face. Slowly but surely, I felt myself begin to feel better and happier as I had lost the weight. As I did, I moved on from speed walking to full-out jogging, and unless I had something to do or I was kept inside by the weather, I never broke my routine. And more to the point, despite the fact my neighborhood had a bit of a reputation for being a little bit seedy, I always felt safe when I went out. The people that I saw were always friendly, shooting me nods and smiles as I passed, and nothing ever bothered me. That was until last spring. When I first woke up that morning, everything seemed as it always was. Nothing more than an average January day in the Pacific Northwest. According to the weather app on my phone, the temperature would stay roughly in the low 50s, perfect for an exercise. And after scarfing down a bowl of Raisin Bran Crunch, banana, and a yogurt cup, I quickly brushed my teeth and began to get ready. I dressed, slipping into my running shoes as I pulled my jacket from the closet and slid it on. Finally, I snatched my house keys from their hook, slid my driver's license into the pocket of my sweatpants, and picked up my iPod, headphones, and sunglasses from the arm of the couch before unlocking the front door. A chilly blast of air struck me as I stepped outside onto the second-story landing of my apartment building, causing me to turn my collar up to shield my neck. Unlocking the door behind me, I quickly descended the stairs and took a moment to simply breathe in and listen. The smell of the Pacific Ocean filled my nostrils, causing me to let out a contented sigh. A few blocks down, I heard a dog begin to bark from somebody's backyard, along with the droning sound of somebody mowing their lawn. As I turned to begin stretching, a loud buzzing sound came from overhead, and I tilted my head up to catch a glimpse of the orange underside of the Coast Guard helicopter as it zoomed over me. A small smile flickered across my lips as I quickly stretched, slipping the headphones over my ears and the sunglasses over my eyes. Holding the iPod up so that I could see the screen, I slid my thumb around the wheel until I found what I had been looking for, and then I clicked. A moment later, my ears were filled with the sweet, sultry sound of Diana Dors as the golden age of Hollywood actress began to sing, a kiss and a cuddle. I shot one last look behind me at my apartment in the parking lot, and then I set off. The cool air felt nice against my face as I jogged, the slight wind blowing my hair back out of my eyes as I headed for the far end of my street. My neighborhood is arranged into a sort of rectangle, dead ending at one end that presses up against the forest, and the back towards the main road. I would always alternate my path to keep things fresh, sometimes heading to the left and up Michigan Avenue to the farthest block, and sometimes the opposite direction towards Fulton Avenue. Today I had chosen the latter path, Houses and parked cars slid by me as I stared straight ahead, losing myself in the music and thudding beat of my feet on the pavement. Reaching a crest, I caught a glimpse of the estuary to my right, the sunlight reflecting off it like it was a diamond. Another smile played across my face as I headed down the other side, hopping onto the sidewalk to get out of the way of a Cadillac heading the other way. Don't forget to keep an eye out for anything, Harry, I mentally reminded myself. Reaching Fulton, I quickly spared a glance to my right, seeing cars and trucks pulling into the parking lot of the Lighthouse Market. A thought occurred to me. Maybe I'll stop in and get a Gatorade or something when I'm done. Haven't been there in a while. Turning away, I kept my pace steady, heading up the street before turning left onto South Wall. I passed by more cars and houses, noting with a slight surprise that a few were up for sale. I shook my head as I remembered hearing about some residents moving back to the more populated parts of the state. People are nuts for wanting to leave here and go back to the cities. The thought kept turning over in my head as I began to head back up the incline. But as I passed by a dirt road that stretched between Wall and the next street over, my train of thought was torn away as a huge shiver shot up my spine. I knew instantly that it hadn't come from the wind either. My collar was still turned up. And besides, it hadn't been the kind of shiver that you get from it. It was an entirely different style. The kind you get when someone is watching you. I slowed to a stop, pausing the music and pulling the headphones off my ears as I looked around. The street was deserted. I saw no one standing in the front lawns or driveways of the houses nearby. And aside from the dull thud of loud music drifting from a house to my left, all I heard was the sounds of the birds in the trees, and the distant sound of a lawnmower still running. Turning to my right, I shot a glance down the dirt road to the next block. Nobody there either. I ran a hand through my hair, my mind trying to make sense of the sensation. After a moment, though, I simply shook my head and shrugged my shoulders. I guess it was nothing. Nothing more than a chill, and you, for whatever reason, getting a little paranoid. Sighing, I slid the headphones back on my head and hit play. And Diana's voice almost instantly soothing me as she shifted into, "I feel so, shaking off the last tendrils of discomfort. I turned away and resumed my jog, heading towards Michigan Ave in the opposite end of the neighborhood. I wish to God that I had listened to my gut reaction and just gone home right there and then. Reaching the other end of the neighborhood, I quickly moved up Michigan and hung a right onto Wasson Street. This was a street that had become infamous to me for the amount of dogs that would rush to the edges of the fenced-in yards, yapping their heads off at me as I passed. However, to my surprise, none came rushing forward as I passed by the houses that I knew them to be at. I guess the owners think that the weather's too cold to keep them outside today or something. I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth though. I kept going, shooting quick looks to the left and the right each time I came to a four-way intersection to make sure that no speeding cars caught me by surprise. Some idiots in the neighborhood tended to blast through at twice the posted speed limit more than a little often. Again though, I was pleasantly surprised to not see a single car driving on the roads. This may be a better jogging session than I thought it would be. I decided that I would end the session by jogging down to the main road once I was done and head down to the boat ramp. Whenever I was in a good mood, I liked to walk through it, stopping to drink in the salt air and quickly shoot a look over at the Cam, a beautiful yet sadly rusted and abandoned ship moored next to it. I reached the crest of the hill and began heading down, approaching the cross with Pacific Ave. I slowed, always stopping before crossing the second main street that made its way through our neighborhood in the next suburb. Reaching it, I shot a look to the left and right for cars. Seeing none coming, I began to step down from the sidewalk and cross the street. but as I looked up and ahead, I froze, almost in mid-step. Someone was standing across the street. They were on the opposite side of the street to me, not standing on the sidewalk but slightly back in the front lawn of a house. Normally, this wouldn't have caused me to pause. I saw people out and about every single time that I went for a run. What caused me to stop though was just how weird the person seemed. For one, they were staring straight ahead at the other side of the street, still as a statue. They never turned their head to the left or right, looking across to the yard across from them. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, due to the fact that they wore a giant hooded sweatshirt or a jacket of some kind. The hood completely obscured their face and blocked it from my view. For another few moments I watched the figure, waiting to see if they would move, but they remained perfectly still. Okay, even I have to admit that's a little weird. I shot a glance to the left, debating whether I should swing straight up to Cannon Street to avoid them. But then I shook my head. Now you are being paranoid, man. You've dealt with junkies and robbers before. One person in a hood isn't even close to as bad. My decision made, I shot another glance around and then jogged across the street, eschewing the sidewalk to stay on the road. As I approached the figure, I began mentally chiding myself for being such a baby. I decided to be polite that I would nod and wave to the person as I passed them. Who knows, maybe it'll brighten their day. The figure continued to stare straight ahead as I approached, and as we drew level with one another, I did indeed nod quickly, giving a half smile and raising the hand not holding my iPod into a wave as I shot past. For a moment, I thought the figure wouldn't acknowledge my greeting and began to turn away. But then I saw them raise a hand of their own to return the gesture, and the hood gave an almost imperceptible nod as well. For a brief moment, I saw the lower half of their face, catching a glimpse of a pleasant smile as well. And then I was past them, heading down the slightly steep hill towards Fulton. I turned my head to look straight ahead again, mounting the far left sidewalk and maneuvering myself around a Ford Taurus, which stuck out of a driveway. I again lost myself in the music and workout, making my way to the end of the street. As I reached the intersection, I chose to spare a look back the way that I had come, and I felt a shiver rocket up my spine. The figure had turned to look down the road after me, at me. Instantly, I turned away, feeling quite uncomfortable by the sight. Another shiver shot through me, letting me know that he was still watching me, and I hurried to head up the street to the final block of my exercise. But I couldn't seem to shake the feeling loose from me. As I jogged past a wooden fence, I attempted to force the image from my mind. Not jogging on that stretch of road for a while, that's just a little too freaking weird for me. Shooting a look down, I saw the sidewalk begin to curve, indicating that I had reached the street. I looked up, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't standing on the corner of Fulton and Kemen. I wasn't even near it. I looked up to see the rectangular green sign proclaim that I was at the corner of South Wall Street. Confusion washed over me like a sneaker wave. Oh, what the? I shot a look behind me. Below me, I saw the street sign for Maple Street, along with the edge of Lighthouse Market at the end. Sparing a glance the other way, I saw the 2 blocks above me, stretching up to the yellow dead-end sign. I shook my head, struggling to understand. I don't understand. Did I just imagine all of that? Did I get that lost in the music and my own thoughts? It was possible. I am a writer, and oftentimes I use the jogs as time to plan out stories in my head to write when I get home. And unfortunately, I tend to have an overactive imagination for someone my age, with a tendency to get lost in daydreams. That's the only thing that it could be, the only logical one anyways. I took a deep breath, trying to silence the tiny voice in the back of my head, one that incessantly chided at me that I didn't have that much of an imagination. Forcing it away, I did the only thing that I could think to do. I turned and began jogging again, heading up Wall Street. The surge of energy that coursed into my veins gave credence to the idea that I had simply imagined at the last few minutes, and I forced myself to concentrate on the road ahead, only allowing myself a single thought about it. That might make a good premise for her story. Gotta keep that one in mind for when I get home. And then I increased my pace, allowing the music to wash everything else away. I reached Michigan and, like I had imagined, turned right onto Wason. As I continued, I noted that no dogs came to bark at me from the yards and driveways, just like before. I pushed the thought away. I hadn't come through before, I only daydreamed that I did. Forcing the thought away, I continued, passing by houses and parked cars as I approached the intersection with Pacific Avenue. As much as I chided myself, however, I refused to look up until I had reached the road's edge. And then I looked across and began laughing at what I saw. There was a shape there, exactly in the spots where I had imagined I had seen the figure. But it wasn't a hooded person at all. It was a small tree or bush, one which had been trimmed and shaped into an odd shape. One that if you weren't paying close enough attention, it could easily be mistaken for a person in the right light. Instantly, I realized the shape must have stuck in my mind from the last time that I had gone out. A shrubbery. You got creeped out by freaking shrubbery. I let out another laugh and quickly shot a glance around before crossing the street, approaching the bush. I hit pause on my music and slipped my headphones off, the sound of my chuckles filling my ears as I shook my head. I spoke aloud. Harry James Lake, you, my friend, are indeed one heck of a baby. You're supposed to scare your readers, not yourself, and especially not over shrubbery. Chuckling again, I began to slip the headphones back on, but I stopped as I realized something. The sound of the lawnmower, the music, the barking dog, all of it had stopped. The neighborhood was completely and totally silent. It wasn't a new experience. There had been times before when things felt completely still out here. It didn't stop it from being creepy as heck when it did, though, because it feels like you're the only person alive around here when it does. Shivering slightly at the eeriness of it all, I turned and looked at the bush, and I couldn't help but shiver again as the image of the hooded figure smiling and waving back at me wormed forward in my mind. Jamming the headphones back over my ears, I hit play, and Diana's singing again filling my ears. This time, however, her voice didn't bring me the warm and relaxed feeling it usually did, only a thin veneer of it. Turning away, I quickly jogged away from the spot, trying to ignore the chills that shot up my spine and refusing to look behind me, as much as my instincts screamed at me too. I reached the end of the block and turned left, making sure to keep my eyes up and focused on the street sign ahead. I drew alongside the tall wooden fence of someone's yard, increasing my pace and feeling more confident that I would reach it. And that's when something slammed into the fence from the other side, hard enough for it to buckle. What the heck? I shouted aloud, leaping off the sidewalk and half into the street as I tore my headphones off. Instantly, my ears were filled by the sounds of what had to be one heck of an aggressive dog barking on the other side. It again struck the fence, the sounds of it scratching fiercely at the wood rising with its guttural cries. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. My heart raced in my chest, and I bent over slightly, putting my hands on my legs as I let out a nervous and choked laugh. Jeez, I'm frickin' crow, man. I lifted one hand and rubbed my face, sliding under my sunglasses to rub at my eyes. People need to train their dogs better. That almost gave me a heart attack. I let out another nervous laugh and then forced in a few more deep breaths. My heart began to slow and I felt my breathing return to normal. The slow, dull ache of my well-worked muscles began to sing in my body as I stood still. The dog had thankfully stopped attempting to ram through the fence at me. The barking had stopped, it likely realizing that I hadn't posed any threat. I slipped my headphones back on my head and then stood up straight, my eyes lifting to look ahead of me, and I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I wasn't beside the wooden fence anymore. I was back down the intersection with Wall Street. Shock filled me. I knew that I hadn't daydreamed at this time. I had jogged around the two streets, and I knew that I had been about to reach Kemen when the dog had startled me. So high was I suddenly 2 blocks in the opposite direction. The biggest chill yet flooded through me and I took a step backwards looking around. Just as it had been my entire jog, I saw nobody outside, and since I hadn't turned on my music again, I could hear that it was still dead silent in the neighborhood. Emphasis on the dead part. As I stood there, a familiar yet more unwelcome shiver shot up my spine again. The same one that I had had when I felt I was being watched. Even though I couldn't see anyone, the feeling remained, and I didn't like it one bit. I turned and looked down the road. The bright, white roof and large sign of the market looked like, ironically considering its name, a lighthouse beacon in the situation that I had now found myself in. I made my decision in a microsecond, speaking aloud. Yep, we're going this way now. And with that, I began jogging quickly down the road, the hill increasing my speed as I went along. I kept my eyes trained on the roof as it began to grow in size, and a renewed sense of hope began to fill me. I'm gonna make it to the store. Yes. I pumped my legs faster, ignoring the burning protest that came from them. And that was when the sun, I honestly don't know. The only way I can describe it is that it was like one of those spinning dimmer light switches in a person's house, able to crank up the brightness at will. One moment I was speeding towards the market, the sun only mildly blinding me as I burst out from beneath the trees. The next, it suddenly intensified, so bright that even with the sunglasses on, I had to squeeze my eyes shut. I continued to run though, refusing to stop. A moment later, the sun seemed to return to normal and I opened my eyes, blinking a few times to rid my vision of the black and blue spots that had taken residence in them. I was running past Wasson towards South Wall. I skidded to a stop, almost slipping on some loose gravel and falling as a mixture of shock and disbelief slammed into me like a Peterbilt. For a moment I stared, blinking, and then I spoke, my voice rising into a shout. What the actual hell? Nobody answered me, the sound of my voice almost seeming to shatter the silence like a baseball through a plate glass window. Yet another chill shot up my spine, and I cast an increasingly paranoid look around, seeing as always exactly nobody. What is going on? I swallowed hard, casting a look back down at the market below. Part of me wanted to try running for it again. I almost did, but somehow I knew if I did, something would bring me right back here, like I'm stuck in some kind of loop. The thought made a sudden burst of fear shoot through me. I looked around, my brain screaming at me to come up with some kind of plan. Only one came to mind. I began running to the nearest house. Reaching it, I slammed my hands against the front door in the loudest, most frantic knocking that I had ever done. Hello, please, if anybody's in there, I need help. I waited for a moment, but nobody came to the door. I quickly moved to the house next door, again banging and calling for help. But like before, nobody answered. And with blind panic beginning to rear its ugly head, threatening to consume me, I began to race from house to house, from apartment building to apartment building, banging on every door and screaming my lungs out. Some of them had lights on in their windows, while the others were dark. But the outcome was always the same. Nobody came to the door, and my screams seemed to echo off the buildings and cars, drifting and dying away. I felt my sanity trapeze precariously towards a knife's edge as I reached the corner of Wall in Michigan, my throat beginning to sting from screaming so much. I cast a look to the left, my eyes widening as I saw the side of my own apartment building just a single block down. Home. Without even thinking, I began sprinting for it, a mixture of fear and hope filling every fiber of my being as it drew nearer. More hope surged as I reached the corner, where my foot caught a raised slab of pavement. I felt butt over tea kettle, the concrete tearing at my hands and wrists. For a few moments I simply lay there. Breathing heavily and terrified of what I would see when I looked up. Finally, I forced myself to lift my head, and I felt tears begin to seep from my eyes and utter hopelessness fill me, because I was back at the corner of Michigan and Wall. I think a small bit of my sanity cracked then and there, because the next span of time, which I'm honestly not sure how long it was, is nothing but a blur. A blur of running down the same two streets that I somehow found myself trapped in, like I was a rat in an endless maze. I can vaguely remember the sounds of my own screams and shouts echoing in the silence, remember slamming my hands against doors, sometimes even the same repeatedly. And I can vaguely remember that no matter what I did, I always ended up back at the corner again, no matter where I tried to run. But there is one thing that I can recall with crystal clarity, and that was the seemingly unending feeling of being watched, of being observed, and not by anything you would remotely call benevolent. I'm not sure when I snapped back to reality. Time seemed to matter little in the loop that I found myself in. The sun refused to move at all from its position high in the sky, even though what must have been hours passed. But suddenly I became cognizant of myself again, myself and my surroundings. The first thing I realized was that I was back at the cross street of Wasson and Pacific. I looked down at my hands, one which somehow still clutched my iPod in an almost death grip. My knuckles were red and raw from how much I must have been banging against the doors, and my throat felt as if somebody had jammed a red-hot poker down it. My cheeks were wet from crying, and my lungs felt as if they were on fire. The second thing I realized was what stood across the street from me on someone's front lawn. It was the figure. Not the bush shaped like a figure. The figure. It still stood as still as a statue, just like the first time that I had seen it, which I now knew hadn't been a daydream. The hood still covered its head, and it stared straight ahead at the opposite side of the street. A surge of fear welled up in me as I realized I couldn't see the bush anymore. My mind raced. How long has it stood there? How many times did I pass by it without realizing? How long has it been watching me? And what does it want? The final thought sent a new emotion through me, likely the only one that I could still feel besides fear and blind panic. Anger. Red-hot anger. Rage being the better descriptor. It began to boil inside of me as the dots connected. It had to be the reason that I was here. It was the reason that I was trapped in this loop. All because what? I had decided to be polite and smile and wave at it. The thought made the rage burn hotter, and even though part of me screamed not to, I began to march across the street towards it. My mouth opened and I began to yell at it, to scream actually. Why? Why are you doing this? What do you want? I stopped about 15 feet from it, breathing heavily and feeling like I wanted to commit murder. I waited for an answer, waited for it to acknowledge my screams. But it simply continued to stare straight ahead as if it hadn't even heard me. I was about to take another step forward when an almost deafeningly loud sound assaulted my ears. For a moment, I couldn't understand what it was, my mind unable to process it. And then I realized that I still had my headphones on my head. My iPod had begun to play, and I quickly lifted the hand holding the device, unclasping my fingers and reaching out to stab at the off button. But I froze, both at the title and the artwork displayed on the screen, as well as the vocals that began filling my ears. "Don't Fear the Reaper" by Blue Oyster Cult. I froze. Whatever rage that I had had seemed to die away instantly, replaced by the biggest, coldest shiver that I had ever felt shoot up my spine and causing me to gasp out loud. The singing continued, Buck Dharma's voice yelling at me to not fear the Reaper as the first chorus began. That was when the first tendrils of horror, beyond even the insanity tearing them out that I had already felt, began to seep into me. I hadn't hit play, and I had been listening to Diana Dors and not Blue Oyster Cult. It was as if the song had been selected on its own, almost as if it were some kind of a message. My eyes suddenly went wide, and feeling as though my heart were about to stop, I slowly lifted my head to look at the figure less than 20 feet in front of me, which had turned in my direction as I had been preoccupied. The head was still bowed too low for me to see anything but its lower face, and then it slowly raised one hand to wave at me. The fingers twittered like a person would do waving at a pet or a wild animal, ever so playfully. That movement alone sent a bolt of renewed terror through me, but it wasn't what made me scream, every part of me filling with horror. It wasn't what made me turn and begin sprinting away, dropping the iPod to the ground, the headphones tearing themselves off my head, and the blaring music replaced with the shrill sound of my own screams as I felt my mind fracture into 1,000 pieces. It smiled at me. It grinned. I can't remember much after that, only vague snippets at most, and those I can't help but shudder at. Those I wish I could forget, because I remember shooting looks behind me to see that thing chasing after me, the hood still covering its head as it continued to grin at me. A grin with a mouth far too wide for its face, and filled with teeth that more closely resembled a shark or an alligator than a human's, chasing after me but never touching the ground as it did. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, straps holding my arms and legs tight to the bed like I was a mental patient in an asylum. When I began calling out, a nurse, a doctor, and to my surprise, an armed guard rushed into my room. For a few moments, they stared at me as if I were about to attempt to attack them. But once they realized that I had returned to the land of the sane, they immediately began bombarding me with questions about what had happened to me, whether I took any kind of drugs or drank profusely, whether I had a history of mental illness. I wanted so badly to tell them the truth, but I knew the only thing that it would do for me was buy me a one-way ticket to the funny farm permanently. And so I lied. I told them that I had been attacked on my run by a man who had attempted to kidnap me. In my mind, I thought it would explain my delirium to them. People who are kidnapped and manage to escape often do so with their mental state in a fragile state, if not completely broken. For a few moments, I thought they would see right through my charade and call me out, but somehow they bought it. They brought the police in, asking me to give an account and a description of my attacker. On that, I didn't really lie, not much anyways. I told them that they had hid their face under a hood of some kind, and giving a vague description of some kind of well-built white man in his 40s, the kind that could easily overpower a slightly overweight 20-something-year-old guy. And again they bought it. After showing me the sketch that they had made, one of the officers patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry, son," he said to me with a smile. "If he's still around here, we'll find him, and then he handed me something in a plastic evidence bag. "I believe this belongs to you. We found it a few blocks away from where we found you. You must have dropped it in the struggle." I couldn't say anything, only nod as I stared at my iPod, now scuffed with several scratch marks from its fall, and from something else, something which had made a single deep gouge in the metal back of the device. I knew they would never find any trace, because what in a way did kidnap me wasn't human, not even remotely human outside of vague appearances. I don't know how I managed to get away, how I managed to survive. I wondered if that thing was simply toying with me, the same way that a cat might toy with a bird when it's not hungry, or if I actually managed to break free. Either way though, I'm thankful that I'm still alive. Like I said at the start, after I had returned home and I guess for the sake of my own sanity, I began to endlessly tell myself that what I had seen, what I had experienced hadn't been real, that I had in effect suffered a simple mental break, either from stress or actually being attacked by another person that day, that none of it had actually happened. When my own words didn't help, I had replaced them with alcohol, and slowly and surely as the months went on, it did in fact begin to feel as though it had been nothing more than a waking nightmare. I slowly began to return to a normal life. I even went back to jogging, though I changed my route, choosing to jog through the next neighborhood over instead. Nothing ever happened to me and I never felt like I was being watched again. Not by anything that wasn't human anyways. Until, like I said, yesterday, which is the reason I decided to write this and to share it with you. You see, I got a phone call from Mark, a friend of mine who recently moved into one of the emptied houses at the end of Wasson Street, where it links up with Fulton. He called asking me to help bring some stuff of his that he couldn't fit in his little hatchback over from his folks' place. For a moment, I felt a small pang of hesitation as a flicker of memory surfaced, and then I pushed it away and said that I would absolutely help him. We met at my apartment and together we climbed into my International Scout, driving over to his parents and loading the flat-screen TV, mattress, and other large boxes into the back. And then we drove back across town and into the neighborhood. I turned down Wasson from Michigan, driving down streets that I hadn't been on in a year. I forced myself to appear calm as Mark knew nothing about what had happened to me. When we reached the intersection with Pacific, I felt a small shiver shoot up my spine, and for a moment I couldn't bring myself to look over across the street, and then I forced myself to. The bush sat there, looking slightly eerie but nevertheless very inanimate in the fading light. I reached down and flicked on my headlights, banishing away the gloom and showing poignantly that it was, in fact, nothing but shrubbery. And get a hold of yourself, man. None of that even happened anyways. Realizing that Mark was staring at me, I eased onto the accelerator and drove across the intersection. I spared a last look at the bush as we passed. It still looked normal. I let out a snort, shaking my head. Told ya. As we began to draw near his house and slow down, I suddenly saw him turn around in his seat and look out the back glass. "What is it, bro?" I asked him. For a moment, he simply continued to look and then turned back to me. "You know anybody on this street besides me, man?" A small wave of confusion washed over me, and I shook my head as I parked in front of his place. "No, not that I'm aware of anyways. Why?" He turned and pointed back through the back glass. "Well, apparently somebody does. Look." That was when an almost forgotten but horrifyingly familiar chill shot up my spine. I felt the blood drain from my face and my heart begin to pound in my chest as I twisted around in my seat to look behind us. There, back up the hill near the intersection stood a figure bathed in the yellow glow of the streetlight which had snapped on overhead, one whose upper face was obscured by a hood pulled down low over its head. I felt myself begin to violently shake as the figure raised one arm to wave at us, twiddling the fingers like a human would at an animal. A flash of white caught the streetlight's glow, coming from the exposed lower half of its face as it grinned. Today's episode is sponsored by Hims. If you've ever tried to lose weight, you know it's not as simple as just eating less or exercising more. There are a million different diets, workout plans, and trends out there, and figuring out what actually works can be frustrating. That's why Weight Loss by Hims is helping people take a more personalized approach. Hims now offers access to an affordable range of FDA-approved GLP-1 medications, including the Wegovy pill and the Wegovy pen. With Wegovy at Hims, you can lose up to 20% or more of your body weight when combined with diet and exercise. It helps regulate your appetite and support long-term weight management, making your goals feel a lot more achievable. The process is simple too. Everything happens online. You'll connect with a licensed provider who can determine if treatment is right for you, and if prescribed, your medication is delivered directly to your door. No insurance necessary. Plus, you'll have access to ongoing support through your care team, along with nutrition guidance, recipes, fitness content, and more. Ready to reach your goals? Visit hims.com/MrCreeps to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's HIMS.com/MrCreeps. hims.com/MrCreeps. Weight Loss by Hims is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk AS. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy, clinical study information, and restrictions, visit hims.com. I live in a small town in the north of England. It was surrounded by miles of open countryside. Sometimes in the summer, hikers would find their way to the local cafe or to the general store that I ran. By September, there were no more visitors. The only people left were the locals, and the town began to withdraw into itself. Winter, when it arrived soon after, was cold and dark, and on some winter days, it felt like it never really went light. Recently, I was standing behind the counter at the store looking out of the window and thinking how it was turning out to be one of those days. This only added to my usual sour mood. I had, you see, been running the store for 20 years. Trade was steady, but this was only because there was nowhere else locally to buy groceries and household supplies. For the first 18 years, I was fine with this. I was fine of being bored seeing the same old faces and listening to these same old gripes. I was fine with the summer tourists complaining how the store's prices were so much higher than at the supermarkets they usually went to. I was fine at making enough to pay the bills and nothing more. But then my life changed forever when my wife died. I was married to an incredible woman named Sarah. I loved her so much. When she passed away from a heart attack, I was devastated. 2 years down the line, I was still grieving and I saw no reason to ever stop. So there I was, positioned behind the counter, gazing out at the gray world beyond my window and feeling low, when the small bell over the door sounded. The bell was there when Sarah and I took over the shop. It was old-fashioned even back then, but it was never going to be taken down, because Sarah had thought that the bell was cute. As the bell rang, the door opened and Tom Garner walked in. Tom worked in the cafe in town. He waited tables, cleaned tables, and when the cafe closed at 3 p.m. on the dot in the winter, he stacked the chairs onto the tables. Tom's sister, Maisie, owned the cafe and prepared the food and kept the business running slow but orderly. She also employed her brother because nobody else would. Tom had been a drunk who had been in trouble with the law and had spent a spell in prison. These days he was sober and honest, but he still carried the look of a tormented man. And on this particular morning, he carried the look of a thirsty man. I sold alcohol in the store and usually only refused to sell it to those people who looked underage and couldn't produce the necessary ID. Tom was plenty old enough and looked even older than his actual years, But if he picked up a six-pack of beer from the shelf and tried to pay me for it, or asked me to reach for a bottle of whiskey or vodka on the shelf just over my shoulder behind the counter, I would refuse. I gave him a small smile, my polite storekeeper's smile. Tom didn't smile back. His gaze moved to the bottles of spirits and then turned to me. He didn't look me in the eye. I figured society put a lot of shame on being a drunk and a criminal. I believe Tom added a whole other level of self-hating all by himself. His voice raspy, he began to say, I would like... He broke off to rub his hand across his lips. Yeah, Tom had a thirst on. There was no doubt about that in my mind anymore. I couldn't rescue him from that misery, from the torture of his addiction, but I could put an early end to this difficult situation. I can't sell you a drink, Tom, I said. I'm sorry. His gaze sunk even lower. His voice was a harsh whisper when he said, I need it. Just this one time, please. And there wasn't much of my heart left to break after I lost my Sarah, but I felt for him. That changed nothing though. His words changed nothing. I shook my head and told him quietly but firmly, no. I couldn't tell then whether he was going to start pleading or if the demon that he carried on his shoulder was going to make him start yelling, and I never found out. Because the little bell sounded once more and an old man shuffled in through the doorway. No one knew exactly how many birthdays Jack Miller had seen. He had already looked ancient when I had first moved to the town with Sarah to take over the running of the store. He had been a practicing preacher back then, one of the fire and brimstone variety. His chapel had been a weather-worn stone building that overlooked the town. But Miller's flock had mainly passed away and no younger folk were interested in taking their place, so the chapel had closed 5 years ago. It stood empty and boarded up to this day. Miller shuffled on. Sometimes in the summer he stopped tourists in the street and pointed and shouted at them to change their ways. They looked at him like he was crazy and kept on walking. He knew better than to try that on with any of the townsfolk. He had to get by on glowering and looking down his nose at every one of us that he encountered. He did just that to me in the store and then cast a passing glower at Tom. Tom, though, had given up trying to slake his thirst and was leaving the store. The bell sounded in his wake. I tried to forget about him and rolled out of my storekeeper's smile for the former preacher. Miller's once commanding voice was reduced to a deep growl. I need poison, he said, for the rodents. He lived in a crumbling cottage on the far side of the chapel's graveyard. No one had been buried there since the chapel had closed, and my theory was that the rats that plagued Miller had moved to his cottage from the graveyard looking for fresh pickings. They tormented him to the point where he was obsessed with them and he bought poison from the store on a regular basis. It came in the form of pellets that the rodents were meant to eat. I thought that he was wasting his time and his money though. If the poison was not working by now, then the rats were either ignoring it or they had become immune to it. But at the end of the day, what did I care if he wanted to throw good money after bad? No problem, Mr. Miller, I replied. I'll just go and get that for you. I kept the rodent poison and liquid weed killers and the like separately in a back room. I was probably being overly cautious, but I preferred to keep them away from the food, even though most of the produce that I sold was sealed in cans or shrink-wrapped in plastic. I headed through to the back of the store. There was a narrow staircase that led up to the first-floor apartment where I lived, a cramped office where I tried and failed to keep up with the paperwork, a larger space where stacks of everything else I sold waited in precarious piles to be taken out to replenish the shelves, and a smaller room with a door that could be locked where the poison and its chemical kin was stored. I found the poison with its garish skull and crossbones on the label, and a screw top designed to make it hard to open, and I took it out to Miller. He handed over the money with a scowl and took the poison without a word of thanks. "You're welcome," I said to myself as the door closed behind him. I was a troubled man who spent far too much time on his own, but I wasn't a jerk like Miller. I certainly hope so anyway. I checked the time on the clock on the wall. It was only 10 a.m. More customers came and went after this. I knew all of them and what they wanted even before they had reached the counter. Mrs. Cooper, a retired school teacher, bought her daily newspaper and a tin of tomato soup. She had purchased bread 2 days before, so it would be the end of the week before she needed more. Joe Turner bought potatoes, a steak from the freezer, and protein shakes. He was going to apply to join the army when he was old enough. This was going to be his passport out of the town. But first, he needed to add some weight to his naturally skeletal frame. I wondered, however, if Joe had a tapeworm, because he remained as painfully skinny as ever no matter how much he tried to bulk up. Alan Wilson, on the other hand, had no problem piling the pounds on. He was a builder who was living on a compensation payout received after he had fallen off a ladder while on a job. In contrast to most of my other customers, Alan was at least cheery as he stocked up on snacks and beer. After each customer left, though, I checked the clock. It was moving so slowly I wondered if the hands were turning as they should. At one point, I walked up to the clock and tapped it with my fingers, but saw there was no problem with the mechanism. Time was simply dragging its heels. Finally, though, the clock showed that it was 5 p.m. Time for me to close the store for another day. I switched the old-fashioned sign and the glass panel in the door to closed, and I locked it. And then, as I did every evening, I went up to the first floor. The apartment was small and stale. It needed the windows to be thrown open to let fresh air in and to be cleaned, but I didn't have the motivation to do this. Without Sarah, the place was nothing but a shell where I picked at microwave meals, showered, and slept. Where I existed rather than lived. I stood there on that day as I had done so many times before and thought how unfair this all felt. I say this because I should have been the one who had died and not Sarah. 5 years ago, I had been diagnosed with a rare brain tumor. I was treated with an aggressive course of chemotherapy, but everybody knew this was a throw of the dice that would not work, which shows how so-called experts can get it completely wrong, because somehow I survived. The tumor still showed on scans, but it had retreated into a small shadow. Sarah and I were relieved and delighted and thought that we would have many more happy years together. Wrong again. So horribly wrong. I shook my head sadly and decided that I didn't even have the strength to poke holes in the top of the microwave meal and turn the dial to 7 minutes. I pulled a coat on and went back downstairs, past the office and the rest, and to the rear door. I didn't have an intruder alarm set. There was no crime to speak of in the town, and the last time that I had seen a police officer must have been the summer before when teenagers on a college outing had started a fight with a couple of local boys. One of them had been Joe Turner. I don't know who had called the police, but by the time they arrived, the trouble had fizzled out and the patrol car soon went on its way. It was something and then nothing, but it was still the subject of gossip for a long while after. And these were the mean streets of my hometown, I thought with a rare grin as I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me. There were a scattering of streetlights and more light showed from behind the drawn curtains of the houses. I looked to be the only person who was outside, and imagined my neighbors were all huddled in front of the TV or making their evening meals. None of them would know or care that I was trudging past their houses, my hands buried in my pockets, my collar pushed up high as it would go against the cold. I followed the narrow main road through town in a loop, passing the cafe where Tom worked at. Through the window I could see that all the chairs had been stacked neatly as they should be. I passed more houses, all bolted against the world, and the town's old tavern. Like the chapel, it was long since closed and boarded over. Then I reached the last of the buildings. There were no lights coming from the open countryside beyond. It was barren land, cloaked in darkness. On a summer's day, it was a scenic in a bleak, gothic kind of way. On a winter's night, a fellow could easily get lost out there and break an ankle, and no matter how hard he hollered for help, nobody would come, and that would likely be the end of said fellow. I kept walking my loop, and in 30 minutes, I was back where I had started. My breath frosted in the freezing air as I stood outside my back door. I didn't want to go back to the apartment, but the increasingly bitter cold drove me inside. I undressed, cleaned my teeth, climbed into bed, and closed my eyes. I lay there for a long time before I finally fell into a fitful sleep. It was still dark when my alarm went off the next morning. Welcome to another boring, empty day, I thought to myself and went through to the shower. Breakfast was black coffee and a handful of dry cereal eaten straight from the carton, and then I went downstairs to open up the store. I was behind the counter ready for my first customer at 9 a.m. on the dot. It was gray again outside and I had the lights turned on in the store, but I could see through the window well enough as Joe Turner walked into view. He looked like he was heading for the store, but then he paused to check the screen on his phone, which meant Jack Miller was the first person to walk into the store that day. Straight off, I could tell the former preacher was in even more of a bad mood than usual. His mouth was firmly set into a scowl and he held a container of poison in his hand. It could have been any of the identical containers that I had sold him over the months, but I had a feeling this was the latest batch and he had brought it back to complain. The old fool had finally worked out that the stuff is useless, I thought, and I put my best, polite, no matter what storekeeper's face on. Miller stomped right up to the counter and slammed the container down onto it. "Look here," he began to growl, but that was where his tirade had ended. He was staring ahead and not at me but into some space only he could apparently see. And then he put a hand to his forehead, narrowed his eyes, and exhaled hoarsely. I realized he was in pain, and whatever the reason, the pain was clearly getting worse. He started to shake. He covered his face with both his hands and leaned forwards. I started to move up from behind my counter to try and help him. Sure, I didn't like the cranky old goat, but I was still going to show common decency. "Are you okay, Mr. Miller?" I asked. He didn't seem to hear me. He seemed to be caught in the grip of pain, a grip that was tightening. He leaned further forward so that he was almost doubled over. I started to worry that he was going to keel over completely. The old preacher was in a bad way. Phoning an ambulance was no use. From past experience, I knew it would take hours because of our remote location, and Miller needed help now. I looked out of the window and saw Joe Turner was still outside. His attention remained on his phone. Whatever he was looking at must have been transfixing because he held the screen very close to his face. I crossed to the window and knocked on the glass. "Hey Joe," I yelled. "Can you come inside? I need your help." Joe might be thin as a twig, but he could still help me guide Miller to a chair to sit down, or help me pick Miller up if his legs did give way. But Joe ignored me. Young people on their phones, I thought, like a grumpy old man. I'd have to help Miller by myself. I turned back to him and was relieved to see that he had straightened up. He was very pale and he still shook, but it looked like the worst was over. "Mr. Miller, are you okay?" I tried again and instinctively put a hand on his shoulder. I was gentle and was barely touching him, but he recoiled as if I had struck him. He staggered backwards away from me. He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot in a way that I had never seen before. "I'm sorry," I said, even though I had done nothing wrong. I was only trying to help. He kept looking at me and kept backing away until he had bumped into the door. He turned to look at it. Though he had used that door hundreds of times over the years, heck, maybe even thousands, he looked at it with a puzzled expression on his face. His hand twitched and moved slowly towards the door handle. This struck me as the weirdest thing. It was almost as if he was trying to remember what you were meant to do with the door handle, which made me wonder if he had been in pain because he had had a stroke or the like. but then he grabbed the handle and turned it the wrong way, and then the right way, and finally he had it open and was leaving the store. The little bell sounded as he did. Through the window, I watched him step out into the street and turn in the direction of his cottage. If he still knew where he lived, that was a good sign, I figured. And that probably it was just a headache, nothing more serious than that. He'd be fine. I exhaled. Oh, there was nothing to see here, folks, and the day would go back to being boring. Miller walked off. He passed Joe Turner, who had stopped staring at his phone. He looked at Miller and then his lips curled into a strange expression. A chill ran through me. I couldn't hear if Joe made a noise or not because of the window, but from the way that he had just shown his teeth, I could have sworn that Joe had snarled at Miller, like an animal would, not a skinny teenage boy. I kept looking out of the window trying to understand what I had seen, but Miller was out of sight by now, and Joe was moving off as well. If he had been planning on coming into the store, he might have changed his mind, which was actually fine by me. My nerves were jangling after what had just happened, so I decided to close the store for 10 minutes to make myself a cup of tea and try to relax. I put the sign that said, "Back shortly" in the door, locked it, and I went up to the apartment. A few minutes later, I was walking back down the stairs with a mug of hot tea. I had decided that Joe had not growled at Miller. I mean, of course he hadn't. It was only my overactive imagination. Feeling like a bit of an idiot, I reached the bottom step and just as someone started hammering on the door. I went through to the front of the store and saw that it was Alan Wilson who was banging on the door with the side of a hand that was curled into a fist. Now, Alan was normally such an easygoing man. I had no idea what his problem was. He could have just knocked in a regular kind of way and I would have heard him. But Alan seemed in a mighty rush, so I unlocked the door and opened it for him. The moment that I did, he barged past me and into the store. "Hey, what's your problem?" I exclaimed. He blanked me and went over to one of the shelves stacked with cans. He seemed to be looking for something and he was still rushing. So much so that he started throwing cans onto the floor. "Hey, don't do that," I protested. He kept paying me no attention and was getting more and more worked up. More cans went flying. I had to stop him. I grabbed his arm and tried to pull it back. He spun around and looked at me, rage burnt in his eyes. "Where is it?" He yelled at me, spittle flying from his lips. Shocked, I let go of him and retreated a few steps. "Where's what?" I asked. He answered with a roar of anger, and for a moment I thought he was going to attack me, but instead he ran outside. I hadn't noticed because of Wilson's messed up behavior, but Mrs. Cooper had come into the store at some point. She must have witnessed the outburst. "What was that all about?" I asked her, hoping for a friendly word of support from the former school teacher. But she looked at me without saying a word. And then a smile spread across her face. It was devoid of friendliness. For the second time on that strange day, a chill spread throughout my body. While Mrs. Cooper's smile widened, she was wearing bright red lipstick, much brighter than the subdued shade she usually used, and a streak of scarlet had spread across her teeth. She started to walk towards me. She was 80 years old and 5 nothing tall, but I will admit that I wanted to turn tail and run away from her. There was something wrong with her. Had there been something wrong with Jack Miller and Alan Wilson as well? And Joe Turner, now that I was thinking of it. I had no idea what this was, and apprehension was building inside me. Mrs. Cooper took another step closer. I said in the firmest voice that I could manage, "I want you to leave now." Her smile disappeared and she snarled at me. Honest to goodness snarled, and as she did, foam bubbled at the corner of her mouth. My guts tightened, and she moved closer still. But then she froze. She gasped and raised her hands to her face. Through her fingers, I could see the pain contorting her features. It looked intense, worse even than had struck Jack Miller. and Mrs. Cooper's legs did give way and she collapsed onto the floor. She was still breathing, but she was unconscious. My head was spinning by now. Part of me was relieved that she was down and out. Part of me still wanted to help her. I knew, though, that I could not deal with this situation myself. I needed professional help, no matter how long it took to arrive. There was a landline back in the office, and my phone was there as well. My own legs feeling less than steady, I hurried through to the office and lifted the handset. I dialed the 3 numbers for the emergency services and pressed the receiver against my ear. All I could hear was the sharp crackle of white noise. I cursed under my breath and picked my mobile phone up. The bars showed that I had a good signal, so I tried calling 999 again. And once again, all I could hear was hissing and cracking. I slammed my phone down. Calling for help was clearly out. I went back into the front of the store, frantically trying to think what to do, frantically hoping that things were going to get better. I reached the counter. The lights started flickering and then went out. The gray, dull daylight meant that it wasn't dark in the store, but the gloom that the power failure had cast the interior of the store into made everything seem so much worse. It felt like one more part of the once predictable, ordinary town I lived in had fallen away, leaving me standing in half light, looking at an old woman groaning and coming around. I decided to keep my distance from Mrs. Cooper. She had been snarling at me just a few minutes ago after all. I waited and watched as she roused. She started trying to push herself up, but clearly didn't have the strength in her arms. She raised her head, looked at me, and said in a strained voice, "Help me." Still, though, I hesitated. She spoke again, sounding croaky and weak. "Oh, help me, Sonny." I felt bad. She was elderly and struggling, so I took a deep breath and went over and helped her to her feet. She regained her balance, but then she smiled, her chilling smile. Her head shot forward and she dug her teeth into my right hand. I cried out as sharp pain shot through my flesh and then pulled my hand free. Mrs. Cooper's smile was now decorated with blood. My own blood. I stumbled away from her. I wanted to go into the back of the store where I could lock myself in, but she was in the way. Logically, based on the difference in our age and size, I could have pushed her out of the way, but I wasn't thinking straight. I was panicking and the pain in my hand was insane. So to get away from her, I left the store. The little bell sounded as I did, and there was something in that sound that made me want to weep. It was so small, so brief, but it held so many memories. I wiped my uninjured hand across my nose and then held my bloodied hand against my chest and moved further away from the store. Mrs. Cooper was emerging. Her snarls drowned out the sound of the bell. There were other disturbing sounds coming from all around me as well. I turned in a slow circle and saw townsfolk emerging from their houses. People that I had known and served in the store for years. Each and every one of them was snarling and staring at me with hatred, twisting their faces. I saw that Alan Wilson was among them, and Joe Turner, both looking at me as if they wanted to kill me. Then I noticed Tom and his sister Maisie. They too wore expressions that sent terror spiraling through me. Tom raised his hand, pointed at me, and growled, "You're not one of us." Maisie pointed at me and said the same in a guttural, unnatural voice. "You are not one of us." The rest of the townsfolk joined them, their strange, bestial voices overlapping in a sickening chant. "You're not one of us. You're not one of us," they said. As they snarled and chanted, they moved closer. I looked around, desperate to get away from them, but I was surrounded, and their strange condemnation of me continued to ring out. "Not one of us." I wanted to plead with them not to hurt me, but fear had stolen my voice. Tom Garner was closest to me by now, and he was reaching out for me until a wave of pain hit him. He screwed his face up and buried it in his hands, and then he fell to his knees. I glanced around and saw the other townsfolk were suffering in what appeared to be the same way. Some were on their knees, some out for the count. It was like an event where mass hysteria affected a whole crowd. Only my neighbors were all afflicted by a sudden onset of extreme pain. I felt nothing. I was not one of them after all, and I had my chance to get to safety. But no, the pain must have been easing because everybody was getting back to their feet. In moments, their psychotic attention would turn back to me. I started running back to the store anyway. Seconds later, the van drove into view. I knew straight away that it was Billy Mackenzie. He worked for the wholesalers who supplied the store, and in all the craziness, I had forgotten that today was a delivery day. Billy was in his early 20s and not the brightest of people. He must have noticed the crowd gathered there but parked the van by the store as he always did and climbed out. I could see from his face that he was puzzled, but that was it. He waved at me and started to open up the back of the van. It was business as usual as far as Billy was concerned. But I needed to warn him that he was in terrible danger. He had to get back in his van and drive away, with me in the passenger seat. "Billy!" I yelled and waved my arms. He didn't react, and it was too late anyway. Alan Wilson and Tom Garner had reached Billy. They grabbed him and they bit deep. Billy screamed and struggled, but there was nothing that he could do. The rest of the townsfolk were streaming towards him. They fell on him and began to rip Billy apart. I was momentarily forgotten in the sickening frenzy, and I stood there sobbing. But then through my tears, I saw a new figure approaching the writhing mass gathered around Billy. It was Jack Miller. The former preacher stood tall as he strode along the road leading from his cottage, and he was not alone. Dozens of rats followed in his wake. Their red eyes and yellowed fangs showed bright in the gloom of the day. Every now and then they glanced up at Miller. They were, I realized, his new flock. Miller came to a halt by the murderous mob, raised his arms high and addressed them in a booming voice. "Give praise for the gift of human flesh. Take your fill and then let my acolytes strip the bones clear. Give praise for this bleak, cold day and the slaughter yet to be." His final words hit hardest. I was next in line to be slaughtered. I only had one hope, and for once, things went my way. Jack Miller and all the townsfolk collapsed again in agony. This time, I did not hesitate. I sprinted towards the store. I glanced back once and saw even the rats were down and out, their filthy forms lying on their sides. I was going to make it. I barreled through the front of the store. I knew there was no point in locking the front door. All the mob had to do was smash the window to get in. My sanctuary waited through the back. I grabbed bread, some Coke, chocolate bars from the shelves, and a key from behind the counter and dashed into the small room where I stored the poisonous and toxic goods. I slammed the door shut and I locked it. I sat there gasping for breath and staring into the darkness. The power was still out and the townsfolk were still out there. They would likely be getting back to their feet by now and wondering where their next victim had gone. I assumed it was only a matter of time before they found my hiding place, but I reckoned that the door would hold. I cursed all of them under my breath and then threw up. Once I was sort of back in control of myself, I took stock. I had enough supplies to last me for a few days, and that was good. I hadn't thought to grab my phone though, that was a mistake. I had no idea if my phone would work again, but it might have, and I could have called for help. As it was, I would just have to sit there and wait it out and hope for a miracle. And so I sat there on the floor and waited, taking the occasional sip of soda and the occasional bite of chocolate. I had no way of knowing the time, but after a while it passed, I wanted to try and stretch some feeling back into my limbs. I stood up and then I froze. I could hear footsteps right outside the door. I stayed stock still and listened to feet shuffling past. There were snarls, the sounds of stacks of cans and boxes being pushed over. I heard glass shattering, but no one tried breaking down the door. I thought then how none of the townsfolk had ever been through to the back of the store. They wouldn't know about the room that I was hiding in. I still didn't dare move. I didn't want to make even the slightest sound to alert them to my presence. The noise of my heart beating, of my shallow breaths. It seemed to fill the cramped space of the room. I was certain that somebody would hear them and start attacking the door. Time ticked by, slow and agonizing, and as slowly the footsteps grew quieter until I believed the townsfolk had left the store. I had survived. I lowered myself back down to the floor. Outside, the day turned to night and then another day dawned. And that this happened was guesswork on my part, locked as I was in the small storage room. I hadn't run out of food or any beverages yet, but I knew that I would have to leave when I did, to grab fresh supplies. I pressed my ear against the door and I listened. I couldn't hear anything. I hadn't for a long time. And so I made a choice. I was going to leave the room there and then. I would get my phone and try to call the police before I got more food and drink and then brought them back to this place. With cramps burning in my arms and legs, I put the key in the lock and turned it as slowly and quietly as I could. The click of the lock opening sounded to me like a painfully loud bang. I waited, listened, but the silence beyond the door remained unbroken. I pushed the door open. Ice-cold sweat trickled down my back and into my eyes. I was shaking. I was convinced I was going to be sick. I swallowed down bile, blinked and stepped out of the room. Gray daylight filtered weakly through to the back of the store. It had been trashed, but it was also deserted. It seemed that I was alone. I had the chance I needed to grab my phone. Before I went into the office, I glanced through to the front of the store. My heart began to race and I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from crying out. I could see that there was somebody lying on the floor just past the counter. I couldn't see who it was, but they weren't moving. I knew that it must be one of the townsfolk who had been incapacitated by a wave of pain. I also knew that this would not be the last. They would be coming around soon and I had to get my phone before they did. But it was as if I was in a waking nightmare where I no longer had control over my body. I tried to walk towards the office, but I couldn't. My limbs would not respond. I willed myself to move. It was hopeless though. Fear held me and it would not release me. I was aware of a tear rolling down my cheek, of the sound of a clock on the wall of the store ticking, and of a small buzzing sound. It was coming from the front of the store as well. I forced myself to focus and saw a cloud of tiny dark shapes. They were over the body. I noticed a stench as well, and it was sickly sweet, nauseating. Finally, I managed to take a step, but not towards the office. I moved towards the front of the store, drawn by grim fascination. I moved past the counter and reached the body. It was Alan Wilson. Blood had flowed from his ears and eyes, his nostrils and his mouth. I lay in dried trails now on his ashen skin. His mouth hung slightly open. As I watched, a fly drifted out. Wilson would not be coming round. He would not be attacking me and tearing my flesh from my bone. He was dead. Relief mingled with horror and my own legs almost gave way, but I managed to hold it together. Wilson was no longer a threat, but what about the other townsfolk? I forced myself to walk to the window and look outside. My question was answered by the abhorrent sight waiting for me. There were dozens of bodies in the street. Dried blood trailed from their eyes, ears, and noses and mouths. Flies swarmed over them, creating a layer of swirling darkness in the gloom of the daylight. I left the store, needing to see, needing to make sure that they were all dead. Tom and Maisie were sprawled side by side among the dead. Tom's lips were cracked and dry with a thirst that no amount of alcohol would ever slake. Joe was curled up on his side, looking pathetically young and slight. Mrs. Cooper was on her back, lipstick and dried blood laying a crust around her mouth. And close by her lay Jack Miller. If the old preacher had finally found his salvation, it was impossible to tell. He had, though, died with his flock by his side. The corpses of dozens of rats were scattered over the ground around him, too. I looked up and past them all down towards where the cafe stood and the boarded up tavern waited. There were more bodies of more of the townsfolk. There was also, I realized with a jolt of horror, movement. As I stared, a figure wearing a hazmat suit walked into sight. They leaned over one of the bodies and seemed to be examining it. Another half-dozen figures dressed in the same way appeared. Some were armed, and I guessed one of them must have seen me because they raised their weapon and pointed it at me. A second weapon was aimed at me seconds later. I stood there bewildered and terrified as a third figure dressed in a hazmat suit walked right up to me. I could just about make out their eyes behind the clear front of their face mask as they looked at me, and their voice was muffled when they said, "Fascinating." I didn't understand. More of the figures in the hazmat gear were grabbing my arms and twisting them around my back. I felt restraints being placed on my wrists and snapped tight, and then a hood was pulled down over my head. The world went dark. I was pushed forwards and into what I figured was a car or a van. A door slammed, an engine started, and I was driven off. The period that followed was utterly disorienting. I was taken to what looked to me like a cross between a hospital room and a prison cell. Men and women who dressed and acted like medical personnel carried out a battery of tests while I was shackled to the bed. None of them said a word, and when I tried asking what was going on, they blanked me. A security camera in one corner of the room was trained on me 24/7. And when the door was opened, I glimpsed armed and masked guards. I fell asleep at regular intervals. I suspected this was because I was being given drugs to knock me out. It was the same routine over and over until an older man wearing a dark suit came into my room. He took a seat by the bed, cleared his throat, and explained what I had been caught in the middle of. He then gave me two options. One of them would see me held prisoner in a secure facility for the rest of my natural life. I would have a TV and books and 3 meals a day. I wouldn't be permitted to leave my room or have any contact with the outside world. The other would see me released and given a new identity and a lump sum of tax-free cash. In return for taking this option, I would need to carry out a task for them. That conversation took place 1 month ago. I'm in a new town now. It's a small, remote place in the southwest of England. I've taken over the running of the store. The layout is different to my last place, but the job's the same. And I'm getting to know my neighbors as they come into the store to do their shopping. They seem like regular folks, living their lives as best they can. I feel bad for them knowing what is about to happen to them though. Electrical signals are going to be transmitted at intervals into the town as part of a secret experiment by the authorities. These signals will reprogram their brains. When the experiment took place in my hometown, the signals had turned everybody into violent monsters. I was immune because of the lasting effects of my brain tumor. The man in the dark suit explained all this to me while I lay shackled to my bed and then presented me with the two options. I made my choice. To win my freedom. I'm here to carry out first-hand observations as the experiment is repeated. It's been refined and the authorities are predicting a different outcome. We will see. In the meantime, I serve the local businessman and his pretty wife. I serve the retired doctor. I serve the military veteran. I listen to their gossip and already know what most of them will be buying before they reach the counter. I give them my storekeeper's smile and I keep my terrible secret from them. It's hard to do this, so hard, but I do it. I stand behind the counter and wait for my next customer. I look at the clock on the wall to check the time, and then I wince and raise my hand to my forehead. Oh, it must be all the stress, I think. I'm getting a headache. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Summer is one of those seasons that can go in two completely different directions. For some people, it's vacations, road trips, and making memories. For others, it's trying to juggle family schedules, work, travel plans, and everything else that life throws at you. And before you know it, you're wondering where the summer went. I think a lot of us put pressure on ourselves to make every day count. But sometimes the best thing you can do is make sure that you're taking care of yourself too. And building in time for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Therapy can help you better understand your needs, feel more confident setting boundaries, and create a version of summer that actually feels good for you. BetterHelp has over 30,000 therapists and has served more than 6 million people worldwide. They match you with a therapist based on a short questionnaire, and if your needs change, you can switch to another therapist from their recommendations at any time. You don't have to say yes to everything this summer. Find support in therapy. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/Mr. Creeps. That's betterhelp.com/Mr. Creeps. I don't think the man sleeps, Carrie. Every night I pass by his house, he's out in his garage, tinkering with something. Oh, Ray's retired. He doesn't have to worry about keeping banker's hours anymore. If he wants to stay up all night doing God knows what, well, he can. My wife said as she flitted around the house, decorating for Halloween. Oh, what do you think of my eyeball wreath? Pretty cool looking, huh? And get it? Looking. I shook my head. Very clever. I am very clever, thank you. Why are you keeping tabs on his nightly activities? Well, keeping tabs makes it seem sinister. It's not. But when you take walks at night, the landscape looks pretty dull. You tend to notice people working in their lit-up open garages, especially if it's a nightly activity. And the landscape is pretty dull. We live across from a cemetery. You're not looking to see if any nightly activity is happening over there, she asked, hanging a 4-foot-long mummified corpse in the doorway. The graveyard in question was one of the major downsides to renting a house in this neighborhood. It had been built nearly 100 years ago when the town was nothing but a sleepy village. But as the town grew, it caught up with this final resting place and it kept growing. Now there were rumors that some shady developers had been trying to snatch up the lot, move the graves, and build new homes in its place. I've seen Poltergeist. We didn't need those kind of problems. 1, you know that I'm not a fan of the cemetery. Oh, because of the lack of fences around it, I know, Carrie said, mocking me while hanging up a garland of severed limbs. Such a strange thing to be concerned about. Ghosts can escape if they aren't contained, Carrie. Simple cemetery facts. Haunting 101. Everybody knows this. And 2, I don't want to look over there and discover that something actually is happening. I don't know, it might be kind of exciting. And no, it wouldn't. Ignorance is bliss, darling. So you would rather focus your attention on a tinkering old man. What if he's building a bomb? What if, she said, sticking bloody fingerprint molds onto the window. When Crumbs and I save the neighborhood, I expect a written apology. Crumbs is a dog. A smart dog, ain't that right, buddy? I said, trying to call him away from my wife. Crumbs lives in my wife's shadow. He's her ride or die. He raised his eyes and looked at me, and then lowered them again. I shook my head in disbelief. I saved your life, Crumbs. She didn't even want a dog. Oh, don't fill his head with lies. He needs to stay sharp to be effective during your nightly investigations, she said with a wink, assuming he's the lead on the case. Hilarious, I said. But seriously, what do you think he's up to every night? Worshipping the devil, Carrie said. What else? I'm being serious. She gave me a look. Serious like, anyway. Well, have you asked him? No, why would I talk to him? She rolled her eyes and slapped her hip out of frustration. Why would you not? If you're curious why he's in there and you see each other every night, just ask him what's up. I thought about it. Logically, it made sense. Nah, I'd rather snoop around instead. She plucked a skull from the decoration tote, held it in her hand and spoke to it with a faux English accent. Alas, poor Yorick, why are men? Why are men what? Well, that's the whole question, she said, playfully sticking her tongue out at me. Should I put the skull on a pike in the yard or on the coffee table? Outside, definitely, since we might actually be seeing heads on spikes sooner rather than later, and better get used to seeing them now. I want the ghost be insulted. They'll haunt you, not me. If you can deal with that, I say go for it. Oh, Crumbs will protect me from any threat. Not if it interferes with his nap time, I said, looking at the snoozing dog. Insulted, Crumbs raised his lazy bones from his dog bed, strolled in between us and plopped down. Carrie laughed. See? He knows where the genuine danger is. I shook my head at the dog. I walk you every night, man. A little solidarity, huh? He huffed and laid down at Carrie's feet. I hated to admit that he looked cute, but he did. Little jerk. Later that night, as I prepared Crumbs for his nightly walk, Carrie came over to me and handed me a headlamp. Please wear this. I don't want you or Crumbs getting hit by a car. It makes me look weird. Hey, better than being dead. Is it? Oh, what does it matter? You don't talk to anyone anyway. Unless tonight is the night you finally speak with Ray. I gave her a look, kissed her cheek, and took the leash from her hand. I'll be back soon. Be safe. I don't want to be forced back into the dating pool. I did my time already. And you'd miss me, right? I asked, fishing for a compliment. Who else would open all my stuck jars? She said, rubbing my biceps. I hit a bodybuilder flex, which made her giggle, and I headed out for our walk. I decided she was right. I never speak to anyone, so why not throw on the headlamp? The world in front of me lit up like a supernova. Crumbs looked up at me, and I swear to God I could feel his judgment. Come on, bud, let's get going before the ghouls come out of their graves. We started our nightly ritual. Crumbs, always excited, slightly pulled me forward. He had to smell all the fresh smells and to add a few of his own. I glanced out to my left and saw the polished headstones reflecting the moonlight. I shuddered. While I hated the cemetery, I couldn't avoid it either. It was the defining feature of this neighborhood. I had heard people call this section of town Haunted Hills, which I hated for two reasons. One, the idea that it was haunted, and two, there were no hills. Undeserved alliteration was a crime against the language. Our strolls walked the boundaries of the cemetery because it was about a mile around and was not surprisingly quiet. That was enough of a nightly stroll to keep Crumbs and me in decent shape. We could have gone another route, but it would have taken me along a busier road, and sometimes Crumbs forgot how little he was and would lunge at loud cars as they rumbled past. He was trying to defend me, which I appreciated, but I didn't need the leash flying from my hand and him ending up in a spot on the road. Usually I would listen to an audiobook, but I had forgotten to charge my earbuds that night. I would have to deal with the noises of the nocturnal world. I didn't mind it too much. A change of pace every once in a while is a good thing. I spied Ray's open garage looming at the end of the street, the yellow light bleeding out into the dark. I really didn't know anything about Ray other than that he was older and worked on something in his garage every night. Beyond that, he was a total stranger. For all I knew, he could be a creature from another realm. I thought back to my grandparents. They knew everybody in their neighborhood. They held block parties every summer, game nights and potlucks once a month. Had a real sense of community. Gun to Crumb's head, I couldn't tell you either of my immediate neighbors' names. As his place got closer, I felt the anxiety of having conversations with people when all I really wanted to do was zone out. With earbuds in, I could pretend not to hear somebody call out and have plausible deniability. But now, if Ray wanted to chat, as old folks often do, I would be stuck. That said, though, Ray never left his garage. Every time that I would walk by, I would clock him hunched over his workbench, fiddling with something. Why should tonight be any different? If the man was knee-deep in some mystery project, who was I to pry? But as fate would have it, Ray took a smoke break just as we had reached his driveway. We glanced and nodded at each other in the way you do while passing strangers on the street. Acknowledge but not engage, and I assumed that was it. It wasn't. "You trying to guide planes with that light?" he asked, pointing at my lamp. I silently cursed Carrie. "Hey, somebody has to bring the boys in safely," I responded. Ray gave me a polite chuckle. "What kind of dog is that?" I stopped, silently sighed to myself, and put my mask on. "Oh, Crumbs is a mutt, but we think he's mostly Havanese. He likes treats. He lives for them. Hold on a second, I have something for him," Ray said, heading back into the garage to grab something. I glanced down at Crumbs, who was happily wagging his tail as if he knew a treat was coming. The dog has ESP with food. Ray returned, a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his lip, and he walked down to the end of his driveway. I realized this was the first time that I had seen the man up close. He was thick-set and stout with ropey arms. He had faded tattoos on his forearms that looked nautical. Maybe he had been in the Navy. His hair was thinning, but it was still black as the night. He had hooded gray eyes, but there was still a spark in them. He looked like he had been a real shit-kicker in his younger years, but he mellowed out with age. As he approached, I noticed that he had a piece of hamburger in his hand. "You okay to get scraps? I can't eat this whole thing and it'll just go to waste." Carrie was adamant that I not give Crumb scraps. She listed all the reasons and they were valid. But when he turns his cute little face up at you, well, the boy eats. You would think my loose rules about human food would buy more affection from him. It didn't. "Hey, just don't tell my wife and we're good," I said. My wife was the same way," Ray said, laughing so hard that it morphed into a smoker's cough. Without missing a beat, he summoned a green and yellow loogie and spat it on the ground. It landed with a wet splat. I had to hold Crumbs in place so that he wouldn't run over to smell it or worse, and dogs can be gross like that. "Here you go, Pooch," Ray said, dropping the small piece of hamburger onto the ground. Crumbs ate it all in one bite. Ray laughed. "I must have been hungry." "All he needs is protein for his nightly walks. I was gonna say I see you both almost every night. You look lost in your own world most of the time." "Oh, sorry, most nights I have my headphones in. Not purposely being rude." No worries, most of the night I'm at the bench." "Oh," I said, realizing that we were going into full conversation mode now. Carrie would be so proud. "Well, what are you working on?" "A few dolls for the Save the Graves fundraiser," he said, pointing to the political sign speared into his lawn. "I was a toy maker for years and I still make some from time to time." "Wow, did you work for one of the big companies or?" "Oh, no. Those guys turn out cheap plastic crap made overseas. I ran a made-to-order toy business. All natural products, all handmade." "That's incredible. What was your biggest seller?" Dolls. Dolls. Every kid wants one at some point, and I love making them too. I used to model a little girl once after my kiddo Rose. Oh, that's sweet. I'm sure she loves that." "She did," he said, his voice catching. "I lost her a few years ago. Cancer." "Jesus, Ray, I'm sorry." It was still a soft spot for him, but he waved me off and braved through. Life has a way of sticking it in and breaking it off, doesn't it? "Yes, sir." The best part of the job, though, was seeing how excited they were when they got them. It warms my heart. These days, it's not lost on me that even though my Rose is gone, her spirit lives on in all those dolls. Ray looked past me and into the cemetery. I was an Einstein, but I was able to add 2 and 2. His wife and daughter were probably residents in the cemetery. It made his advocacy to keep it around clear. Wanting to change gears, I nodded at his yard sign. "You really think that development group is going to buy it?" "Oh, I hope not, but I think they're in the works," he said. That developer, Grosso, is related to Councilwoman Chambers, he said. Really? Oh yeah, as thick as thieves do. She complained about it for a while, and now that she was elected, she's trying to do something about it. Chambers has got enough gumption and no scruples to see it done too. She lives in the big blue house on the other side of the graveyard. That would have explained all the political yard signs last fall. Word is she's rigged it so her friend gets a plum, no bid deal. Gonna print money for him and you know she's gonna get kickbacks. Whole council is filled with crooks. That all seems super illegal. It seems that way because it is. A bunch of criminals want to disturb the dead for what? Cram a few more houses in here. They're stealing the spirit from haunted hills, he said, exasperated. Literally, if they're successful, I joked. Ray smiled. I suppose so. Sorry if I get a little worked up. Losing them once was hard enough. I don't need to lose them again, he said, pointing across the street into the graveyard. She just moved there a few years ago. My people have been here since the founding. Damn near my entire family line is in there. He paused and shook his head. I know it may be weird to want to keep a cemetery near you, but the idea of defiling these folks all in the name of more overpriced homes, he said, swallowing the string of curse words that he wanted to say. Hey, no explanation necessary, I get it. Would you want a flyer for the event? Maybe bid on a few of the items to support the cause. Sure, I said. Thanks. Hold on 1 second, he said as he dashed back into his garage. I looked down at Crumbs. His tail was wagging and he had ketchup on his face. Bud, wipe that up before Mom sees evidence of our crimes, okay? As usual, Crumbs ignored me. Ray came down and handed me a flyer. He also had a small doll in his hand. I don't know if he likes little toys or whatever, but I have this stuffed plushie doll that I made. He can have it if he wants. It was a little girl doll with long black hair and sparkling blue eyes. She was dressed in a purple jumper with a smiling sun on the front. She was about 12 inches tall and hand-stitched. It was, without a doubt, the nicest dog toy that I had ever seen. Ray, wow, that's really nice, thank you. He goes crazy for stuffies. Oh, it's just taking up space in the garage. Rather see it get used than not, you know, he said. Hey, Poochie, you want the doll? He tossed the doll up and Crumb snapped into action. Even though he was old, he loved stuffies. He jumped and snagged it out of the air. He landed with a hump, then violently shook the doll. Ray cackled and slapped his knee. Everybody loves Rose. A testament to your parenting, Ray, I said, adding, and to your craftsmanship. Crumbs usually destroys these things within minutes. Oh, they'll have a hard time breaking that one. Top quality material, he said, petting Crumbs. Well, I should get back to work. Don't be afraid to say hi, huh? I'm always out here. Same, I said, sticking out my hand to shake. His grip was firm. Have a good one. I'll try, he said, turning to walk back to his garage. From over his shoulder, he called out, Put a bid on one of those prizes. Let's keep this neighborhood unique, huh? Will do. We continued our walk. As we turned the second corner, Crumb suddenly spat out the doll. He curled behind me, tangling the leash up in my legs. I stepped out from the pretzel, reached down and grabbed the doll. I held it out for him to retake it, but he balked. Okay then, I said, putting the doll in my zip-up pocket. Half of her body hung out and it looked like she was going for a ride in a human-shaped car. I wondered what would be more embarrassing, the doll in my pocket or the headlamp on my head. I heard somebody dragging a garbage can out to the corner in front of me. For a fleeting second, I was worried that I had forgotten it was garbage night, but then I realized it was 2 days early. When I glanced over at where the sound came from, I saw Councilwoman Chambers standing at the curb. She was diminutive in stature, but she cast a long shadow. She was put together well and always on, even while dragging a can of trash out to the corner. The air of aristocracy surrounded her, a bubble that only wealth creates. We locked eyes and she waved at me. I had never seen this woman nor interacted with her, so I had to assume this was all for Crumb's benefit. When she started walking over making baby talk noises, I knew that it was, or hoped it was. Can't have every politician in our lives with pudding for brains. Oh, what a handsome boy. Aren't you, aren't you? What's your name, handsome boy? She said to the dog as if Crumbs would stand up and tell her. Crumbs, I said. Oh, why did they name you after a mess? You're not a mess now, are you? Sometimes, I said. Crumbs, who greeted everybody that came within a mile of him, stayed cowered behind my legs. Councilwoman Chambers came walking towards him, violating my personal space to pet him. He was not having it. I felt the leash tighten against my legs as he inched away. I'd be careful, he's weird sometimes with strangers, I lied. She eyed the doll in my pocket and her entire demeanor changed. Oh my, did that man give you one of his nasty little rag dolls? He's such a thorn in my side. Why's that? I said, playing dumb. Let me ask you this, young man. Do you enjoy looking out at headstones every day? I mean, it's not the worst thing. I would like to see a fence around the cemetery, hedges maybe. Wouldn't you rather see half a dozen smiling families living their best lives there instead? Would it increase traffic and noise? Her fake smile straightened. And did you know what the police call the cemetery? Junkie land. Because of all the illegal activity that goes on during the witching hours. I've never seen anybody in there after dark, I said. You have to have heard the voices, right? All hours of the night, especially when the weather turns. Fog rolls in and the criminals gather and plot. I almost laughed at the suggestion. Councilwoman Chambers apparently had a turn-of-the-19th century view of how crime worked. She probably still believed a Gangs of New York-style brawl between the Dead Rabbits and the Confederation of American Natives was bound to break out. Here, she said, reaching into her pocket and handing over a brochure. Give this a once-over and then tell me that you're against my plan. Thanks, I will, I said. We should get going. I don't want to be here when the drug lords roll through. I laughed. She didn't. When I got home, Carrie saw the doll in my pocket and was confused. I told her all about my adventure and she started cackling. Well, you had quite the little walk tonight, huh? A lot of peopling for an introvert. Hey, now I know how swing voters feel, I said, tossing the brochure into the trash. She plucked the doll from my pocket and looked it over. Her reaction was a stir-fry of emotions ranging from disgust to admiration. Hey, if nothing else, he knows how to make a doll. This is high quality. Yeah, he modeled it after his daughter. Oh, that's sweet. I feel bad letting Crumbs de-stuff this thing, she said, tossing the toy down. But as the doll tumbled towards Crumbs, the dog sidestepped it and crawled to his bed. Carrie looked at me and I shrugged. It was a long walk. I guess so, she said. Can't believe you actually spoke with a neighbor. That's growth. He was nice. Said to say hi when I passed by again. Are you going to? I shrugged. Probably, maybe not every time, but I'll give him a nod if I see him. Carrie rolled her eyes. I filled her in on the whole graveyard brouhaha and handed her the flyer. She looked it over and made an impressed noise. I thought you hated the cemetery. Oh, I do, but I hate corporate greed and corruption more. The ghosts have so far stayed away from us. But if rich folks are planning to squeeze the last drop out of those headstones, there'll be a splinter under our nails forever. In this fight, I'm team dead ghouls over their living counterparts. I wonder who Ray has buried over there. Said his whole family line, but I think the sore spot is his wife and daughter. It's the impression that I got anyway. I can't imagine seeing your dead family dug up and moved because somebody bought the land. It seems wrong, right? It does, I agreed. We should bet on something and support the cause. If nothing else, maybe it'll get them to add a fence, I said reluctantly. Going from hating the cemetery to supporting it in the span of an evening felt like emotional whiplash. "Oh, fences can't hold back the ghosts," Carrie said. "Only a young priest and an old priest can." "That's demons, and let's hope that there aren't any over there, huh?" "Oh, should we try to contact one?" Carrie asked, her eyebrows raised. I gave her a stern look and she broke into a smile. "Hey, kidding," she added. "You've already guilted me into supporting a potentially haunted cemetery. Don't push your luck with demon jokes," I said, shaking my head. "Life comes at you fast, huh?" "Don't you mean death?" Carrie said, dragging out the word like she was a ghost. I laughed. "I swear to God." "Oh, you love me." "In theory," I said. She playfully smacked my butt and gave me her mean look for all of 2 seconds before laughing. "Oh, such a poker face, Carrie." "Hey, I'm a lover, not a fighter," she said, wrapping her arms around my waist and pulling me close. "What about you?" "Check, please," I said. She laughed again and we went on our merry way. At around 3 o'clock that night, Crumbs hopped up onto the bed and made his way up to my pillow. He wedged his little body between Carrie and me and the wall of pillows we slept with. Annoyed, I got up to pee. I would readjust our sleeping arrangements after. I walked out of the bedroom when something outside the front window caught my attention. There was a glow from a light across the street in the cemetery. There weren't any streetlights on our road, and nor were there any in the cemetery. At first, I thought my brain might still have been waking up. I gave myself a light slap on the face and realized that I was fully functional. That light was out there. Putting off going to the bathroom, I peeked between the curtains to get a closer look. Sure enough, there seemed to be somebody walking through the graveyard holding a camping lantern. I watched the orange flame dance in the dark and I felt a chill race up my spine. Maybe Councilwoman Chambers had been right about late-night rendezvous after all. Whoever was trapezing around the graves was holding something other than a lantern. I couldn't make out at first, but once it clicked, it made me concerned. It was a shovel. Now, there were only 2 reasons somebody would walk through a cemetery with a shovel: depositing or withdrawing. This didn't seem like a deposit. Here I thought that grave robbing had died out around the time that Jack the Ripper haunted London's dark alleys. "Babe, what are you doing?" asked a sleepy Carrie. "There's somebody out in the cemetery." "Mourning? No, potentially stealing." "What?" "Here, come look," I said, waving her over. Carrie yawned and slowly made her way over to the window. I held back the curtains and she looked out. After a beat, she turned to me. "Is this a joke? There's nobody out there." "What?" "It's too late for jokes. I have an early meeting. I'm going back to bed before Crumb spreads out," she said, sleepily patting my shoulder. "You come too." She disappeared into the room, but I wasn't ready to let this go. I peered back out at the cemetery. I didn't see my thief. I thought maybe that they had hidden behind the large oak, but nobody ever emerged. Screw it," I mumbled and turned toward the bathroom. Sitting on the ground behind me was the doll that Ray had given Crumbs. It almost gave me a heart attack. I was worried for a fleeting moment that I might pee myself. My creep radar was already going off. I didn't need to add any more blips to the screen. The doll was leaning against the couch, its glassy dead eyes staring up at the ceiling. The smile looked sinister in the dim light. In the morning, this would just be a dog toy that Crumbs carried around like it was his work briefcase. But now it looked like it might start moving. I walked over to it and nudged it with my foot. It fell flat on its back and stayed still. I felt relief wash over me. I was still safe. I headed to the bathroom and left the doll alone. Before I left, I looked down and muttered, "Hey, we're good people, doll. No haunting us, okay? I mean, it couldn't hurt, right?" "Holy crap, somebody was robbing graves." Carrie yelled at me as soon as I got home the next day. "What? How did you find out?" "A scuttlebutt online. Some other night owls saw a person in there, and when they went to look this morning, they found freshly turned over dirt. Wild, huh? Kinda taking the Halloween thing a little bit too seriously." Dude, that's what you have to say? Give me 2 seconds, Carrie, I just walked in. 1, 2, she counted. Dude, grave robbers and haunted hills. When you say it like that, though, is it really surprising? That's like saying cookies are eaten by Cookie Monster. Dude, are you serious? You were right. Somebody stole stuff from graves. Take the win. The weight of it hit me. Somebody was stealing from the graves. I mean, holy crap. Who was doing it and why? Jesus, I mean, what graves? And do they know who was involved? I did some digging, forgive the pun, and it was a bunch of random ones. Weird. I have to assume that if you steal from the dead, you would plan ahead and pick your spots carefully. Random spots seem strange. And that councilwoman you mentioned last night, she's quoted in the article about how the cemetery attracts a criminal element into all this nonsense. Curious comment as she's ramping up in opposition to the place. Right? This woman's going to make me a booster for this haunted, fenceless cemetery, isn't she? Oh, again with the fence. It allows ghosts to roam freely in the neighborhood, Carrie. A true menace. Carrie rolled her eyes. Yeah, but if Councilwoman Chambers can turn public opinion around in it and award that Grosso guy the land, she's going to make so much money. Allegedly. Allegedly, Carrie echoed. Isn't that messed up? I wonder how Ray is taking this. Oh, I bet he's pissed. Probably. I'm a little pissed if I'm being honest, and I hate that place. I saw Crumbs finally making his way out of the room to greet me. He looked depressed, like a suicidal Charlie Brown. I called to him. He lazily trotted over and stretched for my pets. I gave Carrie a look. What's up with him? Oh, he's been like that all day. Is he bored? Maybe he needs to destroy something. Where's that new stuff he at? He keeps hiding it. What? I said, laughing. Seriously, I found it buried under the pillows in bed this morning. I tossed it to him and went to do some things around the house. When I came back, I saw the doll's little legs sticking out from the bottom of the pile of clothes that you've yet to put away. Weird. I wonder what's up with them. I don't know, dogs are strange. Circling back to the growing pile of clothes, where are we with them? Clean, dirty, in between. Where's the doll at now? She sighed. I don't know, what does it matter? Do you ever remember Crumbs burying anything the entire time that we've owned him? Carrie paused and gave the idea a once over before shaking her head no. Not that I can recall. Why this doll then? Maybe he realized it was unsettling too. I didn't think you would have such a vehement reaction to it. What about our years together would make you think that I would love a tiny, realistic, creepy-looking doll? She had a point. We chatted for a bit about our day, moving around the house as we did. As I went into our room, I saw the doll's legs sticking out from the bottom of the laundry pile again. I yanked it out and shook my head. Hit it again, huh? Carrie said. He's barely touched it. I turned to Crumbs, who had trailed directly behind Carrie. I held it up to him. Hey bud, you want the doll? I tossed it at Crumbs, who scrambled away. The doll landed face first onto the hardwood with a thud, cracking its face. Carrie laughed. I told you, we all hate it, so go put it in the donation pile in the garage. And so I did. I felt a slight tinge of guilt. Ray had obviously spent a lot of time on this, and it felt wrong to toss it into the garage with the other useless stuff that we refused to get rid of. I looked at the doll one more time, the crack running right down the middle of its face, and placed it into a box of Salvation Army donations. Fare thee well, Dolly, I said, turning back into the house. Later that night, after Carrie and Crumbs left for the village of Nod, I did a deep dive into local politics. Ray's suggestion of major corruption within the city had piqued my interest. I started exploring the connections between the developer and the city council, and I was surprised at what had been reported. They weren't hiding that they had a connection, but they kept insisting that everything was legitimate and legal. There was a transparent system in place, and other companies could also bid on the project. But it seemed the other companies in town had all decided not to bid at all, suspicious at the very least. And this whole affair made me decide to look into the cemetery's history. I knew little about it other than that I hated it and it lacked fences. I quickly learned that the fence thing was because the original plot was a lot older than I had previously thought. At the time, the place was so out of the way from the town that it wasn't worth putting one up. Even as the town caught up to the location, nobody associated with it wanted to spend the money. While that made sense, what struck me as odd was the place's lore. Legend says a coven of witches once had gathered where the cemetery now exists. They had been hunted down and killed by local church officials. Before being burned to death, one of them promised to poison the well of souls of all who dwell here. And townsfolk took that to be the people involved with the witch's death. However, as time had marched forward, the legend has changed. People now suggested that the witches meant no one who had been laid to rest there would find peace. Their spirits would walk the earth, forever lost in limbo between the waking world and the great beyond. I thought it all sounded like great fodder for a story, but that was all. While I was reading and the clock flipped from PM to AM, I heard the squeak of hinges coming from somewhere in the house. I assumed it was just Crumbs making his nightly rounds, but when I didn't hear the telltale clipping on the tiles, I stood up to investigate. I saw that the door to the garage was ajar. We moved back and forth between the garage so often that it wasn't uncommon to see, but I had remembered shutting it. Maybe Carrie went out there to grab a seltzer from the fridge and forgot, but I had just heard the creaking hinges. Somebody had just opened it. I flipped on the kitchen light and looked around, but I didn't see anyone. A sweep of the garage yielded no results either. I was stumped. I walked back inside and heard the shuffling of feet on the tile. Somebody had to be in here, maybe one of Councilwoman Chambers' night thieves. I'd rather it be a flesh and blood intruder than something that I couldn't see. I could scare away a thief, a ghost though, I don't know. This is exactly why I demanded a fence. Ghost Containment 101. I rushed around our house, checking all 3 rooms, but I didn't see anyone. I swallowed hard, although my mouth was dry. My heartbeat ticked up as if God were pressing down on the gas pedal. My body shivered and I could feel a change in the air. Once again, I heard soft footsteps moving behind me. I turned and didn't see anything. The growling nearly made me pass out though. Thank God I didn't, because the growling wasn't from a hidden demon. It was from Crumbs. He had dragged his carcass up from his bed and found something that he didn't like in the shadows. I followed to where he was looking, but saw nothing. I moved to him and patted his back. What should have felt silky smooth was coarse and pointed. "What'd you see, boy?" I heard the rush of footsteps behind me, quickly followed by the creak of my front door opening. Crumbs barked and I turned to see the door slowly moving, inviting the outside world in. What the hell? I took a step outside. The night air chilled me as my bare feet touched the cold concrete of our small porch. I glanced around for anyone and didn't see a soul. I shook my head and I mumbled curses to myself. What's going on? I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Carrie. Crumbs barking must have woken her up. She stood in the living room in her oversized shirt and old shorts with both a confused look and crease lines from her pillow on her face. I heard somebody knocking or thought that I did. I lied. I didn't want to worry her and now didn't seem like the time to explain everything. Confident that nobody was here, I felt fine to follow Carrie to bed. I locked all the doors, said a prayer to whoever was listening, and kissed her forehead. Your hair is a mess. Come to bed, huh? I am. Crumbs, you're in charge. He hopped onto our couch and lay down, but his eyes never left the front door. He wouldn't move until he was satisfied that things were safe, and this actually helped me relax. He'd be our oh crap alarm if something happened. I walked over and gave him a pat on the head. Good boy, I whispered. He wagged his tail in appreciation. Morning came and things seemed settled down. Crumbs had passed out on the couch and happily greeted us as we zombied out of the bedroom for coffee. Carrie had asked about the door again. I told her I was reading all about the cemetery and I might have freaked myself out a little bit. She said that was a dumb thing to have done, which I couldn't argue. and to avoid reading scary stuff before bed, I also decided that I would look into security systems for the house. The rest of the day went off without a hitch. That evening, Ray was waiting for us at the corner. I saw him from down the street and took my earbuds out in anticipation. I also removed my headlamp to avoid any more comments. Carrie had instructed me to get some dirt on what was going on with the cemetery. I would honor her request. "Can you believe this crap?" Ray said, tossing Crumbs a small bit of a sandwich. "They're trying to make this place look like a crime haven." "You think the developers are involved?" "And developers in that witch chambers, thieves, crooks, liars, the lot of them," he said, his voice becoming more irritated with each name hurled at his enemies. Sorry, it just fries my ancient butt to a crisp that these people are gonna get away with it. Pardon me, but the sailor in me comes out when my blood boils. It's fine, don't worry about it, I joked. I get it. You think they're gonna do something else out there? "Oh, I guarantee it," he said. "It's why I'm setting up plans to catch them in the act." "Cameras?" Ray nodded. "A magician doesn't reveal his secrets. Just know that if it works, it'll keep them out of here forever. It'll be a dead issue for the city." He started laughing and I joined him. Not because I thought what he said was funny, but more because I really didn't know what this man was capable of, and I wanted to stay on his good side. He had been in the military and was clearly holding a grudge. How far would he go to keep the graveyard? To keep his family close? We BS'd a bit more before he suddenly acted as if he had been struck by lightning. "Oh, I forgot something. Let me go grab it," he said, jogging up toward his garage. Crumbs and I shared a look and a simple understanding passed between us. Neither of us wanted to see another doll in Ray's hands, but as he came bounding out of the garage, we both saw legs sticking out of his closed palm. "Never gonna guess what I found outside my house," he said, opening his hand. I saw the cracked face of the doll that I had left in the garage. "Must have dropped it last night after he left. I found it outside my garage this morning." I patched up the crack on the face, though. My stomach dropped. It was like the ground beneath me dissolved and I plunged into the Earth's core. I could feel the heat from the magma. Crumbs must have felt it too. He growled at the doll and took a few cautious steps back. Ray looked confused. "Oh, what's going on, Pooch?" I think he might be afraid of it," I said. "He kept burying it." Ray laughed. "Oh, dogs are odd, huh? You sure you don't want it, buddy?" Crumbs growled and I translated. "I think he's good, Ray. Sorry he wasn't more receptive." A first rule of toy making is to make what the kids or pooches will play with. I'll put her back on my shelf. Hey, sorry again, I didn't think a dog that I've seen eat poop would have such a discerning taste. It's okay. Every rejection is a chance to learn what works and what doesn't. I don't hold it against you or the good boy there," he said, reaching his hand down to pet Crumbs. Crumbs took a nervous step forward, sniffed his hand before giving Ray one small lick. "Hey, I think all is forgiven," I said. Good, good. Don't want any bad blood from good people. Or, dogs, too. You want me to monitor the cemetery during the walk? If I see someone, maybe I'll scare them away." "It's not smart to enter a fenceless cemetery without permission first. They see it as a transgression," Ray said. I kept waiting for the laugh, but it never came. However, I felt a bit vindicated about my fence stance. Nodding, I re-gripped Crumb's leash, and then I'll shout from a distance. I left not long after that. Ray had said that he needed to finish up his project before midnight. I didn't pry as to why that was because a little voice in my brain kept saying, "You don't need to know what nefarious plans this old man is up to." I agreed with my cautious inner monologue. Score 1 for little voice. As I rounded the last corner of the cemetery, a fog had settled around us. This wasn't uncommon, but it didn't make it any less unsettling. Naturally, my thoughts drifted to the spirits and their supposed transgressions that Ray had warned about. My skin prickled as the goosebumps migrated north up my spine. I retightened my grip on the leash. Crumbs, now would be an ideal time to finally open the pod bay doors and release the escape pods, huh? Let's not stay out any longer than we have to. Crumbs caught the scent of something on the ground. He started sniffing the dirt and pulling me toward the cemetery. I stood firm. Buddy, just crap on Brady's lawn, he's a dick anyway. But Crumbs was stubborn. He kept yanking me into the street toward the grass of the cemetery. I held firm. Come on, dude, work with me here. He refused. He had caught the scent of something and he would not stop. I'll give you like 10,000 sausages if you stop. He didn't. I gave him a little more leash to help him track the scent. I didn't like standing in the middle of a foggy road at the best of times. Doing so outside a graveyard was another level altogether. Crumbs sniffed and sneezed. He pulled his head up and went stock still. His attention was laser focused on something inside the cemetery. I followed his gaze, but in the brief time that we had been standing here, the fog had thickened like it had gained the freshman 15. That's when I remembered the headlamp in my pocket. I turned it on and peered into the fog. The light met the white wall and it died on arrival. The light did nothing but invite jokes from old Navy guys. I thought about keeping it on, but when Crumbs started growling, I quickly flipped it off. This time when I yanked on the leash, Crumbs relented. Whatever he had been tracking had scared him so much that his bravado had dropped. He was ready to be safely back inside our house. I gave one last cautious look into the cemetery. I expected to see nothing but the wall of clouds around me, but in the dim moonlight I saw a figure walking in the distance. Oh shit, I whispered. It was a man and he was moving from grave to grave about 100 yards from me. He had something slung over his shoulder, but unless I had Inspector Gadget eyes, I would never be able to make out what it was. I had no intention of interjecting myself into this equation any more than I already had. It was best to let the pros handle this. But since I didn't think I'd be able to find an exorcist on such short notice, the cops would have to do. Crumbs, we're going solo walk mode. I scooped him up in my arms, held him like a football, and did my best Saquon impression. While running, I couldn't help but marvel at how bad the fog had gotten in the last few minutes. While it wasn't unusual for this area to get foggy when the conditions were right, I couldn't remember a time when it was this impenetrable. Neither could Carrie, who had put her audiobook on pause and come to the window to look for me. As soon as I had walked in the door, I could see the relief on her face. She eyed the headlamp in my hands and frowned. Why aren't you wearing it? Follow me, I said frantically, placing Crumbs on the ground and stomping off towards the garage. Carrie followed behind me, confused but going with it. You saw me put the doll in the garage yesterday, right? Yes, why? Well, it showed up at Ray's house, I said. Carrie's face went slack and pale. No, it didn't. Carrie, I saw it. Remember the other night when I said that I thought I heard knocking? Well, I wasn't being 100% honest with you. What are you talking about? Are you having an affair? What? No, please. You think another woman wants to put up with my issues? I said, pointing at myself. She relented and nodded in agreement. The other night I heard the door to the garage open and footsteps walking around the house, and then the front door opened and... I'm sorry, what are you saying? I think that the doll is possessed and walked out of the house. The shock on her face was instantaneous and deep. I could almost hear her brain popping. This is the kind of information that fundamentally tilts your worldview. Nothing is ever the same. She laughed nervously and then shook her head. Are you saying that little dog toy doll walked out of our house all by itself and you didn't share this with me? I know, but I didn't want to scare you or have you think that I was insane. Well, I'm scared now, terrified even. I know I'm an idiot, I said. Forgive me, be mad tomorrow, I said, pulling the donation box from the pile. The doll should have been inside. It wasn't. Oh my God, she said, her hand moving to her mouth. This can't be happening. I know, but the other option is that Ray broke in and took it back, which is also not ideal. Oh, I feel lightheaded. I think I need to sit down. she said, stumbling back. I dropped the box and caught her as her eyes fluttered closed and she passed out. I carried her to the couch and laid her down. "Carrie, you okay?" Her eyes opened and I was once again staring into those sparkling emeralds. She slowly sat up, her head still spinning. I got her some water and she downed it in an instant. I refilled it again and she downed that one too. "Jesus Christ," she finally said. "Hey, if you know the man, we may need his help," I said. Carrie smiled, shook her head, and ran her hand through her hair. "What is going on?" "There's more," I said. "Of course there is. I saw someone in the fog in the cemetery. I don't think it's a caretaker either. You think it's another person trying to make the place look bad? Maybe. How did you see them with the fog?" "Dumb luck," I said. "Why can't we ever dumb luck with lotto numbers instead?" Crumb started growling and took a few steps toward the front door. Carrie and I locked eyes, concern churning between our gazes. What was out there? The fur on his back was raised into a mohawk. Somewhere in the fog we heard Ray yelling. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but he sounded distressed. I looked at the door and then back to Carrie. "I'll call the cops," Carrie said. Crumbs was snarling now, barking as if somebody was trying to harm us. I had never seen him this agitated. "Oh, they'll take forever with this fog," I said, sighing and resigning myself to my fate. "I should go and see if I can help." "I would rather you not." "Hey, I'd rather not too, but I couldn't live with myself if I heard him in trouble. But let fear keep me from helping him. It's dumb, I know, but..." "Hey, it's brave," she relented. "It's the right thing to do. Hold Crumbs back, okay?" She whistled and it broke Crumb's spell enough for him to sprint over to her. He was still anxious and on edge. He licked her face a few times before turning back to the door. I walked toward it and he barked at me. Carrie wiped away a tear. "He's trying to get you to stay." "He's a good boy," I said. I hesitantly turned the handle of the front door and pulled it open just enough to look out. It was hard to see anything through the fog. Anything could be waiting out there for me. I shuddered. Ray yelled again from somewhere inside the mist. I opened the door wide enough to head out and I heard Carrie yell. I turned to see a crumb-shaped blur dart from her hands, sprint through my legs and break for the foggy cemetery. "Crumbs!" Without thinking, I ran after him. I couldn't let any harm come to my little dude. Crumbs was barking somewhere out there, but my vision was limited. I knew that I had crossed into the cemetery because I was on slick grass and not pavement. "Oh yes, it's working," Ray yelled somewhere in the distance. These weren't distressed exclamations that I thought that I had heard. He was thrilled about something. Off to my left, I heard Crumbs growling. I turned on a dime and started running toward him. With my vision compromised by the pea soup, my foot caught the corner of a headstone, and I went flopping to the ground. I landed on my chest so hard that it pushed all the air out of my lungs. As I rolled over onto my back and sucked in the air, my eyes caught something lying on the grave next to me. It was one of Ray's dolls. He had placed the doll on its back in front of the headstone, its dead, glassy eyes staring up at the night sky. You could see the swirls of fog reflected back. Unlike the doll that he gave us, which he said was modeled after his daughter, this one looked to be older. Maybe it was his wife. As my brain tried to process everything, I felt someone under me. I rolled off the grave to discover another one, this one different from the last two. I glanced at the plot next to me and there was another different doll. Same for the next. I had to assume he had made one for every grave in this row of the cemetery. Ray yelled what sounded like gibberish and the fog instantly dissolved down this row of graves. It was as if God himself had cleared a path from on high. Well, God or his neighbor to the south. The rest of the fog remained on either side of me. I felt like an ancient Israelite passing through a parted Red Sea. I glanced down at the opposite end of the clearing and saw where this fog tunnel had ended. Councilwoman Chambers' a big blue house. It couldn't have been a coincidence. In that moment, I clocked that several of the nearby graves all shared the same last name. It was a name I knew because I saw it on Ray's mailbox every night that we did our walk. These must have been where his people lay buried. All of his people. Like he had told me, some of these graves dated back to the town's founding. Jesus Christ, I muttered. Ray's voice broke through the fog again. More gibberish, but this time when he stopped, the ground below me shook. The row of headstones down the clearing all began to tremble and fall over. As they did, wisps of a putrid-smelling green smoke emerged from the displaced soil and swirled in the air above the doll bodies. The swirling, vile green stench formed a funnel and burrowed into each tiny figure's chest, infusing the doll with this magical smoke. There was another rumble on the ground, and the fog around the now exposed row of graves became so dense that I couldn't see any of the porch lights from the surrounding houses. And that's when the doll next to me sat up. It wasn't alone. All of them slowly sat up and looked around. I scuttled to the edge of the fog like a frightened crab, but these dolls paid me no mind. I wasn't their target. They all stood, turned toward Councilwoman Chambers' house and began marching. Crumbs came zooming out of the fog like a doll-seeking rocket and lunged for one of the tiny figures as it passed by me. Before his teeth could sink into the felt, I yanked him out of the air and held on firm. He squirmed, but as I tightened my hold, he relaxed and licked at my face. I stood, looked back toward my house, and was about to run when Ray had emerged from the fog. He mustn't have seen me because I had moved to the edge of the 6-foot-high fog wall. Ray looked down at his little minions and smiled. He wiped his eyes and I saw that he was crying. He placed his hand on a fallen headstone and nodded. I won't lose you again. This felt like a moment that I wasn't supposed to see. When he looked up, we locked eyes. Shit. If he was surprised, he didn't betray it. Instead, he nodded at me. Your doll was my test. I needed to know if it would work. I tried to respond, but no words formed. What do you even say to that? I never intended to harm you, just needed to know if it was possible. When I found that doll in my driveway, my heart was so full. It was like Rose was back with me. If it worked for her, it could work for them all. Crumbs squirmed and I struggled to hold him steady. The marching dolls were driving him wild. He felt the conflicting dog objectives of joyful play and ride-or-die protection pulling him in different directions. I whispered in his ear to relax him, but it had a limited effect. He was acting how I felt, manic. Ray nodded at us. The pooch knows. You protect your family at all costs, in this life and the next. I watched as the first few dolls crossed the street and entered Councilwoman Chambers' yard. As they set foot on her grass, their little bodies ignited into mesmerizing marching green flames. They climbed onto her porch and set it ablaze. Ray turned and watched the glow. Protect them at all costs. I turned and ran. The fog was still dense around me, but the cleared path made the trek easier. I heard Ray laugh as I burst through the wall of fog at the edge of the street. Carrie was standing on the porch, her hand over her surprised, gaping mouth. Hurry, she yelled. It was all that she could force out. Her mind was taking in several amazing things happening all around her. A horror movie fog, a green-tinged fire eating away at a distant house, her husband and dog suddenly emerging from a graveyard like something was chasing them. As bad as that was, how much more would her brain break when I told her about the dolls? Crumbs leapt from my arms and bolted right to Carrie. She scooped him up and he coated her face with nervous licks. I ran to her, grabbed her arm, and dragged her toward the open door. What's going on? She asked, her mind reeling. You don't want to know. Should we call the fire department? You might want to call those priests that you mentioned earlier. About 10 minutes later, the fog in the councilwoman's house burned away. Firemen were spraying down the last dying embers while paramedics and police spoke with a few neighbors. I could see Chambers standing near one of the "More Homes Now" signs outside her burnt husk of a house. Both she and her husband looked dazed. The only neighbors who hadn't come outside to watch the fire were us and Ray. The police initially suspected arson, but they never found conclusive evidence to support that story. I knew the truth, but I wasn't coming forward to say anything. Not only would they think that I was insane, they would probably try to pin the whole thing on me. In the weeks since, the city's desire to move the cemetery had been, for lack of a better phrase, put on the back burner. They seemed to have found other issues to focus on. Councilwoman Chambers had dedicated herself to informing her constituents about fire safety. The lady never let a crisis go to waste. I still see Ray on our nightly walks. We make small talk and he always seems to have a treat for crumbs. We've never brought up what happened that night, and if I had to bet, I would imagine we'll never discuss it. Did I have a billion questions? Well, of course I did. Every time I saw him, I had to stop myself from blurting out something about black magic or doll making, or who those people were to him. But what good would come from burrowing down on the fantastic? Some things are better left unsaid. What's the old expression? Fences make good neighbors. Every now and then you get that snap picture of just how small the world really is. It's one of those times when you're halfway across the world and recognize a guy from the gym, or you spot your childhood crush ahead of you in the line at the DMV. I've moved a lot and lived a lot, and these things happen to me every now and then. So when it does happen, I don't always think much of it. Until not too long ago, I lived in a small townhouse. I worked as a shift manager at a component factory in northern Pennsylvania, not too far from Pittsburgh. It wasn't anything fancy, mostly compartments and storage for snowmobiles and tractors. Honest work, but it took quite the drive to get there. Almost 50 minutes by car one way. But I had a great place. It wasn't big space-wise, but there was a great open floor plan that made the place feel 3 times bigger than it actually was. 2 floors, 2 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, and a living room with an adjoining kitchenette. Perfect for a bachelor or a small family. The only problem was the bedroom door, which could jam if I closed it too hard. I was coming back from a bad breakup. My ex and I had been talking about moving in together, but we just couldn't make it work. She had these anxieties that kept her from really committing, and she ended up second-guessing herself to the point where I was no longer part of the conversation. After a while, we simply had to accept that she had no idea what she wanted, but she wasn't in a place to be with me either way. I accepted a transfer up north along with the promotion, and I wished her the best. I had been living up there for about a year when one morning I noticed somebody moving in across the street. It was nice not to be the newest guy on the block anymore. I only saw glimpses of the owner. There was a woman standing outside on the lawn pointing at 2 movers and trying to direct them with a voice that could barely be heard outside her own head. It was like watching someone trying to tow a car with a rubber band. By the time that I got back home that night, there was still furniture on her lawn. I decided to be the good neighbor and head over, see if she needed any help. She was doing her best to tip and angle a 3-seat couch by the time that I got there. She wasn't making it through the door on her own. I waved at her. "Excuse me," I said. "You need any help?" "Oh, it's fine," she said. Thank you, really." "You sure? It looks like you need to angle it and pull sideways. That's a rough one-man job." She rolled her eyes and let out a sigh. She nodded in quiet resignation, and less than a minute later, the couch was on its way through the living room. It's always a bit eerie to move into a new place. Everything looks so barren that you can hardly imagine it being a space where people lived and breathed and laughed. For the time being, this woman's life was all boxes and bare floors. Every step echoed off the walls. I helped her with a couple of boxes before she let her guard down. She had this short brown hair that sort of clung to her sweaty face, and these deep pockets under her eyes. I could tell she hadn't been sleeping a lot. There was a shake in her hands that showed she had either been skipping meals or was deathly nervous. After carrying in some of her kitchenware, she stopped me at the door and forced a smile. "Sorry," she said. "I'm Julie." I introduced myself, shaking her hand. She was definitely trembling. "The mover screwed you, huh?" Yeah, they were only paid to dump it all on my lawn, it seems. Sorry to hear that. Looks like you're almost done, though. Yeah, but the unpacking's gonna take a couple of days. But it's nice to get settled. There was something about her voice that seemed familiar. It reminded me of my own in a way. And then it just kind of clicked. I knew this woman. Julie and I had gone to the same school. I hadn't recognized her as she used to be the tallest girl in class. And then she just sort of stopped growing while the others kept going, making her the shortest girl in class over the course of about 2 years. Now that I thought about it, it had to be her. It was obvious. I'd had enough of a crush on her not to forget that face anytime soon. The moment I recognized her, it was like she recognized me in turn. She let out a huff and looked me up and down. I can't believe it, she laughed. What are the odds? Julie, you wanted to be a teacher, right? Yup, she nodded. And I am. And you had these apple earrings, I said, gesturing. They were the size of golf balls. She couldn't hold back a snort and stepped away, crossing her arms. And you went out with James, I added. Man, I haven't seen him in years. Her smile froze in place. She nodded, rubbing her shoulder in a self-hug. I noticed she had a wedding ring. Yeah, she said. Good times. She excused herself and thanked me for the help. She offered me a 20 for the trouble, but I waved it off. She insisted, but I had made my mind up. She ushered me out the door. I gotta check on Danny, she said. She's been awfully quiet. You got a kid in there. Yeah, my girl Danny, she smiled. 4 years old, she's in her room. She's had a rough day. Well, tell her I said welcome to the neighborhood and feel free to drop by sometime. I'll do that. I wandered off, only to stop halfway across the lawn. I looked back, only to see her still leaning against the doorway. You still got those apple earrings? I asked. No, she said, shaking her head. Times change. It was a dumb question, but I couldn't help myself. I waved goodbye, and that was that. I caught myself glancing out the living room window a couple of times before I headed to bed that night. I could see Julie in her window putting up decorations. A couple of framed pictures, curtains, a couple of lamps and candles. And finally, a pot housing a tall blue sunflower. Unusual. I had had a huge crush on Julie in high school. I had thought about asking her to prom, but James got there first. I ended up going with Margie H., who was more interested in using me as a dress-up doll rather than a boyfriend. There was a lot of, do this, it's cute, and oh, don't do that, it looks weird. She ended up spending most of the night with her friends across the room. James and Julie, on the other hand, only had eyes for each other, slow dancing under the disco ball to all the greatest hits of the 90s. But there seemed to be no James around anymore. Perhaps it was just like she had said. Times change. But looking back at that night, I couldn't imagine the two of them apart. Not for a moment. I tried not to bother Julie and her daughter for a couple of days. I thought about heading over to say hi someday, but I figured they needed some time to get settled. I was probably overthinking it, but I didn't want to give a bad impression right off the bat. It's one thing to be helpful, it's another thing entirely to be creepy about it. And you don't want to mess things up with somebody you're going to see across the street for years, and maybe even decades to come. I wondered about her daughter Danny. I was yet to actually see her. I had to leave for work so early that I had never seen Julie take her to daycare, and by the time that I got off work, they had already come back home. Julie wasn't letting her play in the front yard. Then again, maybe that was by design. You don't want your 4-year-old to run amok near a busy road. So I tried to keep my curious eyes to myself and focus on my own life. But after months of empty inboxes and being ghosted on apps, you start to cling to whatever light in the dark you can spot. And I couldn't help but to think that maybe a light had moved in just across the street. One day as I came home and browsed my mail, I noticed a letter addressed to Julie. She had a different last name. It took me a while to connect the dots. She had James' last name. And given how she had a wedding ring, I couldn't help but consider that maybe they were still together. Either way, I had a misplaced letter to deliver. I made my way across the road and knocked. Julie opened, holding a phone to her ear talking to someone. I handed her the letter in silence and she rolled her eyes apologetically at me. She wasn't in a very enthusing conversation on her phone apparently. She mouthed "thank you" back at me. As I turned to leave, she put her phone down for a second. "May, would you mind helping me with something?" I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "I need some help with Danny's room. I'm useless with electronics." "I'll give it a go, sure." "Oh, thank you so much. Drop by tomorrow around 7 if you can, alright?" "Tomorrow, 7. Got it." She put her phone back to her ear and waved goodbye. I just stood there for a couple of seconds, trying to catch a glimpse of her through the window. But the only thing that I could see was that blue sunflower of hers. The thing was tall and it always seemed to be turned your way, no matter where you looked. It was downright creepy. The next day I went over to see Julie. My heart was thumping away in my chest a little harder than usual. I was trying to keep it cool and not get my hopes up, but there's something about an old crush that just taps at your heartstrings. I knocked on the door, peeking at the window. The sunflower was still there and I could have sworn it was still turned towards me, even as I stood by the front door. And Julie opened the door with a tired smile. She had this pink blouse with white lilies and a pair of slightly too big jeans. She had some makeup on, I noticed. "Oh, just got back from work," she said. "Come on in." She had done a lot to the place. Pictures of her and James on the wall. All the carpets were out. Birthday cards on the fridge, guest towels in the downstairs bathroom. She had put in some work. "Oh, you've been busy," I said. "Is Danny doing okay?" "Oh yeah, better than me, that's for sure." I looked over the wall of framed pictures. Julie and James at the Grand Canyon. Julie and James dressed up for Halloween. Julie and James at their wedding. James' light hair was a nice contrast to Julie's dark mahogany. "I don't see any pictures of Danny." "Oh, there used to be plenty," Julie said. "These are the only ones that we could keep." "Well, sorry to hear that." I looked at Julie, who nodded her head matter-of-factly. I could tell that I had struck a nerve. She showed me upstairs and to the left. She was yet to put up any lights, so the corridor was a bit darker. There were these big yellow letters on the wall leading up to Danny's room. She must have painted them by hand. "Little Lady Sunflower," it read out loud. "Oh, I call her that all the time. The first time I said it, I had this cold, so it came out as a little, not little, and it just kind of stuck. And now that's cute." "Well, the little lady is with her aunt tonight, so she won't mind us stomping into her holy kingdom." Danny's room was as classically girly as girly things get. A well-made pink bed, pink curtains with white stripes, toys and dolls and stuffed animals, picture books with horses and nature and cute animals. It was all very neat though. Either Danny was the most organized 4-year-old in the world, or Julie had taken some time to clean up before I got there. There were a lot of little things to go through, and Julie needed help running an Ethernet cable along the wall. It took some time to set it up, but it felt nice doing something with my hands. Then she had me change a couple of lights that she couldn't reach. I didn't ask her about it, but I found it strange that she wanted UV lights in her kid's bedroom. Julie brought out a couple of boxes, the final items on the agenda. Cameras. "Oh, it's just been me and Danny for a while now," she explained. "I get nervous." "Hey, you're the parent. Ain't no shame in being careful." "I'm glad you understand." She had me set up 2 cameras in the bedroom, one overlooking the hallway and one overlooking the bedroom window. I helped her set up the Wi-Fi and I showed her how to access the feed and recordings. It was simple stuff, but not very high quality. Having helped her out, she made me coffee and sat down to have a chat in the kitchen. We talked about old friends and memories, reminiscing about the times that we had talked as kids. But I could tell that she was holding something back. Every now and then, she would completely shut the conversation down, instead focusing on the cup that she cradled between her hands. Then after a sip or two, she would change the subject. Finally, I just had to ask. "I'm sorry to bring this up, but I gotta ask about James," I said. I see him on the pictures and you're wearing the ring." Oh. She snapped her attention, shaking her head. "Oh, right, of course, I'm sorry. I thought everyone heard about the fire." I was halfway through an apology when she shushed me. "Oh, no, it's fine, really, it's been months." She told me about the fire. They had lost their home some time ago. This was the reason she didn't have that many things to put on the walls. Most of it was lost, along with James himself. "I didn't even know that he was still in the house," Julie said, trying to keep a brave face. "I thought he was in the backyard waving in the firefighters. I was out front with Danny." "Oh, I'm so sorry, Julie." Feels strange to say it out loud, but that's what happened. It's gotta be tough on Danny, a poor thing. Julie put her hand on mine and took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said. "You've been a great help." "Well, that's what old friends are for." "Right," she smiled. "Friends." We said our goodbyes and I watched her close the front door. I could hear her wander back upstairs. It was dark outside, only briefly interrupted by the occasional passing car. People coming and going, paying no attention to the love-struck man gawking at the widow's front door. I snapped out of it, giving it one last look before I called it a night. The blue sunflower was still there in the window. I couldn't help but to wonder, out of all the things she managed to save from that house, why did she save a houseplant? Her own husband hadn't made it out, how come the flower did? As I walked back across the street, a curious thought struck me. The camera that was angled at the window could probably see across the street. She could see me right now. Why do you need a camera for the second floor window anyway? Especially for a window that can't be opened. Wouldn't it be better to have one by the front door? Over the next few days, I met Julie a couple of times. I came over with a bottle of red wine as a late housewarming gift, and she came over with some leftovers. She made this mouth-watering sausage stroganoff that kept her stomach warm all day. She also made her own snacks, like peanuts and sunflower seeds, lightly salted and honey roasted to perfection. After a few weeks, it was rare for me to go a full day without seeing her, and yet I hadn't met her daughter. Danny was always busy with something, sleepover at a friend's house, staying with her aunt across town, and going to bed early. There was always something, and I was yet to see a picture of her. I asked Julie if she could show me her phone once, and she promised she would, but she would change the subject and forget shortly after. But it was hard to be suspicious and even harder to care. Julie was getting comfortable in that house, and it showed. There was a glow coming back to her. One day after work, there was a knock on the door, a longer one than usual, slower. Julie was standing there with one of my phone bills. The mailman had messed up again, and I reminded myself that I had to have a chat with them about it. Then again, I didn't mind the inconvenience of having Julie over every now and then. At first, I thought she was just coming over in a rush, but there was something to her demeanor that was different. She crossed her arms, but she wasn't reserved. It looked casual. "Did you enjoy the snacks I brought?" she asked. "Oh, Danny loves the roasted ones." I'm a sucker for salty stuff. "What about sweets?" I thought about it, nodding as I made a mental list. "Well, it depends on the sweet." She grinned at me. "I'm kinda sweet." It didn't take much more than a wink and a giggle for us to end up kissing. We made out on the couch as I fumbled for the remote control. I couldn't get in the mood with a Judge Judy rerun going ooh and ah in the background. Finally, as we made ourselves comfortable, I could let my heart go. Julie had this wonderful lavender shampoo that filled my senses, but there was something strange about her kisses. They had an almost chemical taste to them, like a tinge of ammonia. Maybe she had a weird toothpaste. Somewhere in the awkward fumble of eager hands and skin touching skin, a whisper reached the back of my ear. "I missed you," she mumbled. "I've missed you so much." I didn't know what to make of it. I think I tried to rationalize it as her wanting to be with me for a while, or perhaps she really enjoyed our time back in high school. But then another whisper. "Oh, I've missed you, James." There was an awkward pause. We tried to laugh it off, and she shook her head, taking a deep breath. She tasted the words for a second and leaned in close. Danny is with her grandma. I expected her to say something, excuse herself perhaps, but there was a trauma there and we were both consenting adults. Mistakes were bound to happen. One thing would lead to another and Julie didn't go home that night. I don't blame myself. I was lonely and stupid. Even before she had moved in across the street, Julie had always been a bit of a girl next door in my mind. In one way, this was a dream coming true, but in another way, it just felt wrong. Nothing we did that night felt as true and honest as that one mistake she had whispered into my ear. I've missed you, James. The next morning, I woke up in a daze. It felt like I had had too much to drink, but without the headache. The world felt draped in cellophane. I woke up in my room alone, and Julie was lucky she got out of the bedroom at all. I had slammed that door pretty hard and the lock was finicky. Maybe she had a knack for it. I could hear noises coming from downstairs, so I threw on some boxers and a bathrobe and I wandered into the hallway. I could hear Julie as she moved around some plates and glasses, and she was singing this tune like something from a commercial. You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too? It was strange. I had never heard that song before, and yet I knew the lyrics. I wandered down the stairs as Julie waved me to the table. She had made grilled cheese. I sat down by the table as she gave me a peck on the cheek. She handed me a plate and sat down next to me as cheerful as ever. I made your favorite, she said. I didn't know this was my favorite, I smiled back. Haven't tried it yet. I picked it up and held it. And then something cold ran down my spine. These weren't my plates and these weren't my glasses. She had served orange juice, but I didn't have any in my fridge. This wasn't my kitchen. These weren't my windows, not my chairs, not my tablecloth, not my house. Julie looked different. My hands looked different. And as I was about to take a bite, this escalating pulse deafened me in my right ear as a radiating warmth burst through in waves. My heart was terrified long before my mind was, and as my instinct screamed at me to run, I instead turned to my right, to the third chair at the dinner table. A voice spoke to me. It cut through the cellophane of my mind. It wasn't loud, but it enveloped my ears. The vibration didn't come through sound, but through a pulsating warmth rattling my inner ear. A droning creak, more clicking than voice, like someone smacking their lips and tongue into clicking little words. It's your favorite, Daddy. I dropped my plate. I was sitting in my kitchen alone. No Julie, no one to my right, just my dinner table across the room from my kitchenette. The clock on my wall showed that I had another 40 minutes before I had to go to work. I couldn't hear anything. It was like my ears had popped from pressure, and no matter how much I squirmed and turned, it didn't pop back. I put my finger in my ear and I felt a blockage. I turned my head to the right and scratched, only to sense this mounting pressure on my eardrum. I had to resort to using a toothpick to open my ear up. And when I did, dirt poured out of my ear canal and onto the dinner table. It was a lot. I sat there for a moment catching my breath. Julie had left a sticky note on the front door. Had to get up for Danny, it read. Talk soon. She had signed it with a little heart. I washed my ears, had a quick shower, and got ready for work. On my way out, I noticed the mailman. I was halfway to my car when I turned to him. Excuse me, I said. Can you make sure that you don't mix up our letters again? Mix up who? He called back. Me and the neighbor, I keep getting hers. I've been doing these rounds for 12 years. I ain't about to mess them up now. Well, you did several times. He laughed, shaking his head. I don't think I did. That whole day passed in slow motion. I had to stop a couple of times just to sit down. I'd get this pressure in my ears like I was free diving at an uncomfortable depth. Sometimes I would get these white flashes, like I was standing somewhere too bright. Little stings and burns, giving me the semblance of ticks and twitches. I forgot to bring my lunch, but one of the guys could tell that I was having a rough day. He offered me a turkey sandwich. As I went to get it from the fridge, that pressure started to build in my ear again. But this time, as it swallowed my sense, a voice came through. "Mom made your favorite." I turned to see the break room table covered in plant dirt with little green sprouts. Something bulbous moved just beneath the surface. "Mom made your favorite." I held a fistful of sunflower seeds. The sprouts on the table were growing so fast they resembled spasming tadpoles, reaching for the fluorescent lights. And the bulbous growth kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. "Mom made your favorite." My fingers cramped so bad that my nails dug into the meat of my hand. Blood mixed with the mush of a turkey sandwich between my fingers. I fell to my knees trying to force my fingers open, but it didn't work. Two guys came running trying to help me straighten my arm out. They couldn't do it without the risk of breaking my wrist, so they had to sit there with me and wait for the paramedic to come. It took a shot of muscle relaxant to get it loose. They had me scheduled for a doctor's appointment. I was sent home early that day. I hadn't taken a sick day since I had started, so they could tell that this was not normal. Things looked different driving home in the middle of the day. You never see the sun like that usually. There are different sounds, different cars on the road. It makes it all feel unreal, like a bad dream. Coming home, I went straight for bed. By the time that I woke up, it was dark outside. Walking downstairs, I noticed a letter by the door. I must have missed it. There was a post-it attached. "Oh, you didn't hear me knock. Just wanted to drop this off." I picked up the letter. Just a phone bill. Strange though, would the mailman really make that kind of mistake after I specifically reminded him? And did he do it out of spite? No, that didn't seem right. I had a curious thought. When I helped Julie set up the camera in her daughter's bedroom, she had given me access to her Wi-Fi. I had also set up the password. I had no intention of spying on her, but if one of the cameras caught the view of the mailman, I could see if he really messed up that bad, or if he had done this to mess with me. The feed reset every 48 hours or so there would be plenty of time to check. I sat down with my laptop. I had to find just the right spot at the edge of the living room, but I managed to get a weak signal of her Wi-Fi. I typed in the password, connected to the camera, and I rolled back the footage. I felt a bit bad about doing it, but there was no way that she would know. Sometimes we do things behind closed doors that we're not proud of. I checked the feed from earlier that day. I saw Julie leaving my house in the morning. I saw myself walking out and heading off to work, having a quick conversation with the mailman. I then saw him watch my car roll out of the driveway and walk up to my house, dropping a letter through the door. Well, that couldn't be right. I kept watching. Julie came back to her house, holding the pot with her blue sunflower. She put something into my front door and it swung wide open. She grabbed the letter, looked inside, and then entered. According to the feed, she was inside my house for over an hour. She came back out, still holding the pot with the blue sunflower. She hurried across the road and back into her house. A few minutes later, I saw her inside her daughter's bedroom, still holding the plant. I could only see her in the corner of the feed, caring for the plant, watering it, tending to its leaves, and then she turned on the UV lights. I fast-forwarded. Slowly, I could see the sunflower turn, not towards the sun, but towards the camera. There was a knock on the door. I shut my laptop and got up off the floor. I peeked out through the window only to see a strand of dark mahogany hair. Julie. The next second, I was opening the door. I hadn't planned on doing it, but I did. Everything looked brighter. "A long day?" I asked. I hadn't said that, not with my voice. And Julie walked through the door with a tired smile. She gave me a peck on the cheek. Oh, I hate being a temp. Claire won't stop bugging me. She'll come around, I said. She seems like one of the good ones. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know anybody named Claire. We sat down by the dinner table. I don't remember making pancakes, but they were on the stove. I plated and served them with a spoon of ice cream and some raspberry jam as Julie told me about her day. She talked about going to see people this weekend, about making plans with her parents. And after dinner, she kissed me. But not like she had kissed me earlier. This was a real kiss. Like she had held back the love. I love you, she whispered as she pressed her forehead against my shoulder. I looked up, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the kitchen window. My hair looked brighter. James? I gasped for air as the front door swung open. I was wearing my bathrobe and it was dark. Julie looked at me, her eyes wide. It took you long enough, she smiled. Did you get your letter? Yeah, I said. Thanks. No worries. You okay? You look a little bit pale. I don't know, I said. I don't know what's going on. You want me to come in? I can make you some. No. I answered before my brain could register what I was saying. She gasped, like I had struck her. I could feel something bubbling in my chest as my heart raced. I want to see Danny, I said. Can I see her? Oh, sorry, she's at her friend's house, Julie said. I don't think she is. And Julie's wounded expression melted into a mild amusement, like I was playing a joke on her. I'm sorry. I don't think she's at her friend's house, I repeated. And I don't think she's with her aunt or grandmother. And frankly, I don't think the mailman keeps messing up our letters. What's with the tone? She asked. Did I do something wrong? Did you? Our eyes stayed locked for a couple of seconds, and then something changed. You want to see her? Fine, I'll go get her. She stormed off across the street. My heart sank as I watched her pick the blue sunflower from her window and head my way, cradling it in her arms. I slammed the door shut and backed away from the door. Seconds later, something metallic rattled into the lock, and the door swung open. She really was good with locks. Here she is, Julie said, cradling the pot. Don't you recognize her? Don't you recognize your daughter, James? I'm not James. I can't believe it's taking you this long. She walked inside and slammed the door shut. She put the pot on the floor and I backed away. As I did, she started humming that tune again, that melody. You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too? Something ruptured in my head. My right eye went red and blind as a stream of blood poured out of my nose, burning my senses with a sting of copper. I closed my eyes only for an unnatural vision to come out of the dark. How I backed away from Julie in another place, in another house. A memory of a voice but not my own speaking from inside my mind. It's not a child, Julie. We can't keep living like this. But she's yours, James. Everything that stands between you and this family is you. I want to be a father, not a gardener. Flashes of pain. Memories of tears stinging behind my eyes. Late night talks. Checking the bathroom trash to see if she was still throwing up sunflower seeds. I was back home, making my way up the stairs. Julie was downstairs, the pot was still on the floor. And then as I closed my eyes, I was somewhere else. I was a little bit taller and my reflection had a lighter complexion, brighter hair. There were pictures on the walls, pictures of James and Julie and a lot more. And in more than half of them, she's cradling her blue sunflower. What are you going to do, James? An echo yelled from downstairs. Are we going to keep living like this? I'm not doing this. I want more kids. She screeched back. She needs a sister, a brother, and right now she needs a father. It's not a child, Julie. It's a weed. I birthed her. Blinding light, an operating room, holding Julie's sweaty hand as her nails dug into my skin. A terrified nurse falls to her knees. Her hands are covered in dirt and blood. A doctor holds what looks like a blue walnut. It fits in the palm of his hand and it has a pulse. I scream until my lungs ache, but Julie smiles. 100 nights of smashing pots and throwing that plant in the garbage, only for it to come back brighter, stronger, bigger in the morning. Every touching kiss from Julie came with that one nagging thought that she was using me to bring more of them into the world. Every whisper of venom cutting through my heart. Until one day when I stand alone in our bedroom with a lit match. It smells of gasoline. "You'll come back," Julie says from across the hall. "She'll bring you back." And I don't care. My eyes open and I'm crawling down the hall. I hear Julie walking around downstairs. "Danny had me feed you a ton of the stuff," she called from the kitchen. "I thought she'd be James by now." I looked down at the empty corridor. My legs hurt, I was warm, like an invisible fire choked the air. My hands looked different. Were they even mine? There was a sound coming from the stairs as something moved. The flower pot tipped up from the top step. The blue sunflower swayed a little. In little stretches, it came down the hall moving on its own. And from the bottom of the pot, something stirred. She had cut out the bottom of the pot, allowing something to reach out. The moonlight burned the image into my mind as I saw the pallid arm of a 4-year-old child pulling its way towards me. It came closer. As I blinked, I saw the flame spread around me as a vision of Julie looked at me from across the hall, shushing the blue sunflower like an upset child. I blinked again and the pot was closer. The sunflower just outside my bedroom door. The deep navy blue of its petals rattled with excitement as white dirt covered grub-like fingers pressed into the floor, pulling itself forward. I was burning and I was not, but I did exactly what James had done on that fateful day. Despite the fire, the pain, and the uncertainty, I kicked the door closed. It slammed shut with a bang. Something touched the knob, but it didn't budge. The lock had jammed. Something pounded on the door louder and louder, but it wouldn't budge. I blinked. "Well, then go ahead and burn," Julie cried out. "Burn, James. She'll bring you back to me and it'll all start over again." I blinked. The memories sounded different in my mind. I know what she had said, but I remembered it differently, like I had heard two voices at once. "Well, then go ahead and hide," Julie cried out. "Hide. She'll bring him to me no matter what you do." I had to do something drastic, but I was stuck. The window didn't open. In that burning space in my mind, I heard the windows crack and break as the pressure from the fire burned my retina shut. And in this place and time, I wrapped my hand in my bathrobe and smashed my bedroom window. 2 cracks in the glass echoed behind my ears. Without shoes or a shirt or even a plan, I tumbled out of the broken window. And in another world, a part of me still burned to the sound of Julie humming that one tune over and over and over. I landed hard. I cut my leg and foot on broken glass. I lay there watching blood pool around my ankles. The neighbor's dog was barking. They must have heard the screaming. There was something moving in my blood. Tadpoles, bean sprouts, seeds maybe. Someone called out to see if I was okay. Someone that wasn't Julie. And before I passed out, I saw her around the corner looking my way. She wouldn't have time to do anything. Her voice faded as my fingers ran cold and my vision dark. "She'll bring you back, James. If not now, then later." She turned and walked away. And as she did, her blue sunflower turned towards me for a final time. I think the blood loss saved me. It got out some of whatever poison she put in me. She set her house on fire and disappeared that night. She left most of her things behind to burn. I was stitched up and took some time off work. Weeks later, I would still get these occasional flashes whenever I sat down at the dinner table. I would see Julie sometimes. She would laugh and smile. Other times, she would have her back turned to me tending to her plant. I moved out not long after, somewhere closer to work. It's hard to pretend this didn't happen, but it's even harder to explain it to someone who doesn't believe it. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt. For a moment, I was James, and if I had been just a bit less careful, I would still be James. Maybe that's all I'd be. But a couple of weeks ago, I got something in the mail that proves I'm not out of my mind. It was an unsigned greeting card. Someone must have dropped it off by hand. "Congratulations," the colorful print read. "You're gonna be a dad.